Section 1. The last thing Dr. Lena Marlowe expected to lose that night was her entire world. It was 2:47 in the morning, and the emergency ward of St. Aldrich's Hospital had finally gone quiet, the kind of quiet that seasoned doctors never trust. Quiet in an emergency room is not peace, it is a held breath. It is the ocean pulling back from the shore just before the wave arrives, and every doctor who has survived enough night shifts learns to feel that withdrawal in their bones. Lena stood at the nurse's station, her long blonde hair pulled back in a loose knot that had surrendered several strands to gravity hours ago. Her green eyes moved across a patient chart she had already read 3 times, not because it contained anything new, but because reading was easier than thinking. 14 hours into her shift, her coffee had gone cold in its paper cup, and the fluorescent lights hummed above her like tired insects circling something they could not leave. She was 34 years old, 1.60 meters of stubbornness and steady hands, and she had built her life the way a surgeon closes a wound, carefully, precisely, leaving nothing to chance. No husband, no children, no plants even, because plants required a person to come home at predictable hours. She owned a small apartment with a bookshelf full of novels she never had time to read. Fantasy novels mostly, relics of a childhood spent under blankets with a flashlight, back when she still believed the world contained hidden doors. Medicine had replaced all of that. Medicine was her world, her anchor, her answer to every question she was afraid to ask herself. When people asked why she worked so many nights, she said someone had to. The truth was simpler and sadder. The hospital was the only place where she knew, with absolute certainty, why she existed, and in exactly 11 minutes, all of it would be gone. The intercom crackled at 2:55. Nurse Okafor looked up from her station, one eyebrow raised, and Lena felt that familiar cold thread pull tight along her spine. The body understanding something before the mind agrees to. The doors of the emergency bay burst open at 2:58 a.m. "Female, unconscious, unknown identity," a paramedic shouted, wheeling in a gurney at a half-run. "Found collapsed near the old Riverside district. No witnesses, no ID, no phone, no known cause." Lena moved on instinct, snapping on gloves as she crossed the corridor, her exhaustion evaporating the way it always did when the wave finally arrived. "Vitals? That's the thing, doctor." The paramedic's voice faltered, and in 12 years, Lena had never once heard a paramedic's voice falter. Her pulses, wrong, 40 beats a minute, then 190, then 40 again. Regular as a metronome, both of them, just switching, like her heart can't decide what world it's beating in. "That's not a rhythm, that's 2 rhythms, Lena muttered. "Machine error, get her on our monitors." "We swapped units twice in the ambulance, same reading." Lena reached the gurney and looked down, and the clinical checklist running in her head stumbled over its first item. The woman was perhaps in her late 20s, though it was impossible to be sure beneath the grime. Her skin was streaked with soot and something darker, something that smelled faintly of scorched earth and rain. Not city smells, not river smells, nothing that belonged within 100 kilometers of the Riverside district. Burns curled along her forearms in strange, spiraling patterns. Lena had catalogued every kind of burn a human being could suffer. Flame, chemical, electrical, friction. These were none of them. These were not the random cruelty of fire. They looped and branched with a terrible symmetry, as if something had written on her. Her dark hair was a storm of tight curls, damp with sweat, a fringe of them plastered against her forehead in small commas. Her clothing was torn and filthy, and Lena's eyes snagged on this detail and refused to let go. Hand-stitched, not vintage, not artisanal. Hand-stitched the way clothing is made when there are no machines anywhere to do it. "Get me a trauma panel, full blood work, burn dressings, and page whoever's on call for toxicology," she ordered, keeping her voice level, because a level voice was the first medicine any patient received. "Let's start a line." Nurse Okafor cut away the ruined sleeve. Lena lifted the woman's arm to find a vein, and the skin beneath her gloved fingers was fever-hot. No, wrong again, not fever-hot. It pulsed with warmth, in waves, like standing near an open oven door that someone kept swinging. 40 beats a minute, said the monitor. Then, without transition, 190. "Doctor," Okafor said quietly, and did not finish the sentence. "I know. Let's just get fluids in her." Lena reached for the catheter, steadied the needle above the pale inner elbow, and leaned in. The woman's eyes snapped open. Lena froze. She had seen thousands of patients wake in panic, in pain, in chemical confusion. She had been grabbed, screamed at, bitten, wept on, and once, memorably, proposed to. Nothing in 12 years of medicine had prepared her for those eyes. They were blue, but not any blue that belonged in a human face. They were the pale, luminous blue of glacier ice, of glass held up to winter light, and where the pupil should have been, where every human eye holds its small black anchor of darkness, there was nothing. No pupil, no iris ring, just endless glowing glass blue color from lid to lid, staring up at her with an intelligence that felt ancient and terribly, terribly awake. Every rational explanation Lena owned presented itself at once. Scleral lenses, aniridia, some undocumented congenital condition, and every one of them dissolved under that gaze like paper in water. Because conditions do not look at you. Conditions do not recognize you. And this woman was recognizing her, with the unmistakable relief of someone who has searched a very long time. Ma'am. Lena's voice cracked on the first word, and she hated it for cracking. Ma'am, you're in a hospital. You're safe. I need you to stay calm and... The woman's hand shot up and closed around Lena's wrist. Her grip was impossibly strong, not the grip of a burned, dehydrated, dying patient, but of something merely wearing a dying patient, the way a hand wears a glove. Slowly, with a strength Lena's whole body could not resist, the woman pulled her down, down, until Lena's ear hovered inches from her cracked lips. Behind them, Okafor was calling for security. The sound seemed to come from another country. The monitors around them began to scream. Every machine in the bay flatlined and spiked at once, numbers cascading into impossibility, heart rates in 4 digits, oxygen saturations above 100, temperatures that meant combustion. The overhead lights flickered, browned, surged. Somewhere far away, someone was shouting Lena's name, and the name already sounded like it belonged to someone else. The woman whispered 5 words. Now, it is your turn. The world did not fade. It shattered. Like a mirror struck from behind, reality breaking into 1,000 silver pieces, and Lena falling through every single one of them. She felt the hospital peel away from her skin layer by layer, the fluorescent light, the smell of antiseptic, the pressure of the floor, the sound of her own name. She tried to scream, but there was no air. She tried to hold on to something, but there were no hands. There was no her, for a moment that lasted either half a second or half a lifetime. There was only the falling. And then, grass. Lena's eyes opened to a sky she had never seen before. It was dawn, or something like dawn, but the light was wrong in the most beautiful way imaginable. 2 moons hung low on the horizon, one silver, one faintly rose gold, dissolving slowly into a sky streaked with colors that had no names in any language she spoke. She was lying on her back in tall, soft grass, silver-green blades swaying above her face, each one catching the light like a thread of spun glass. Somewhere near her head, something small and 6-winged lifted off a stem with a sound like a plucked harp string. She sat up so fast the world spun. She was still in her hospital scrubs. Her stethoscope still hung around her neck, cold against her collarbone. Her ID badge, Dr. L. Marlowe, Emergency Medicine, was still clipped to her pocket, absurd and impossible, a relic from a world that suddenly felt like a story someone had once told her in another life. Around her, in every direction, stretched a forest unlike anything on earth. The trees were colossal, wider than houses, taller than towers, their bark a deep silver gray, threaded with veins of soft golden light that pulsed slowly, patiently, like the breathing of enormous sleeping animals. Their canopies wove together hundreds of feet above her head, and through the gaps, that impossible 2-moon sky watched her like an eye that never blinked. The air was cold and sweet, tasting of pine and rain, and something else underneath, something electric, alive, humming just below the surface of everything, the way a hospital hums with current behind its walls. Except this current was not in the walls. It was in the ground. It was in the light. It was, she realized with a slow, crawling awe, in her, a faint warmth threading through her veins where that impossible woman had gripped her wrist. Her medical mind, loyal to the last, tried one final stand. "This is a dream," she whispered. Her voice sounded very small among the giant trees. "Head trauma. I fell. I hit my head on the gurney rail. I'm in a coma. I'm in my own ICU, and this is the most detailed hypoxic hallucination in the history of neurology." The forest answered her with a horn. It was long, low, and achingly clear, a sound like bronze and moonlight poured together, rolling between the great trunks from somewhere west of her, and it was answered, seconds later, by another horn far to the east. Then came the hoofbeats, fast, many, closing in from both directions at once, converging on her position with the coordination of things that hunted together often and missed rarely. Lena scrambled to her feet, heart slamming against her ribs. She turned in a slow circle, searching for somewhere to run, but the forest offered no directions, no cover that wasn't also a trap, no north. Every instinct from every trauma base she had ever commanded said the same thing. When you cannot run and you cannot fight, be the calmest thing in the room. So she stood still, lifted her chin, and waited. They broke through the silver trees in a ring of motion and light. 12 riders, mounted on tall white stags whose antlers branched like frozen lightning. The riders wore armor of layered leaf steel, green and silver, overlapping like living scales, and cloaks that seemed woven from the forest's own shadows, shifting with colors that weren't quite there. Their bows were already drawn. 12 arrows, tipped with pale light instead of steel, pointed directly at her heart, and not one of those 12 arms trembled. But it was their faces that stole the breath from Lena's lungs. They were beautiful the way winter is beautiful, sharp, pale, perfect, and utterly without warmth. High cheekbones under skin like moonlit marble, eyes like cut gemstones, emerald, amber, violet gray, hair in long braids threaded with silver rings, and ears that rose from beneath those braids to elegant, unmistakable points. Elves, whispered a voice in the back of her mind, the voice of the little girl under the blanket with the flashlight. Those are elves. Actual, real, impossible. Nitharavel, the lead rider commanded. The words were foreign, liquid, musical, and then, horrifyingly, wonderfully, Lena felt their meaning bloom open inside her skull half a second later, unfolding like a flower pressed between the pages of her thoughts. Do not move. She raised her hands slowly, palms open, the universal grammar of surrender. My name is Lena, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to feel. Dr. Lena Marlowe. I don't know where I am, I don't know how I got here, but I'm not armed and I'm not your enemy. The riders went very still. Not the stillness of soldiers awaiting orders. Lena knew that stillness, had seen it in police officers outside her trauma bays. This was different. This was the stillness of people who have just watched a legend step out of a children's story and stand up in the grass. Several of the stags shifted uneasily, sensing what their riders felt. The lead rider slowly lowered his bow. He was younger than the others, or seemed it, with dark silver hair braided back from his temples and eyes the deep, layered green of the forest's own heart. There was a crest worked into the breastplate of his armor, a crystal held within a crown of branches, and the others held their arrows steady until he raised one hand, fingers spread, and the whole ring of bows sank as one. His gaze moved over her the way hers moved over an unconscious patient, rapidly, precisely, missing nothing. Her strange thin garments the color of a spring sky, her golden hair, her round, human ears. And then his eyes found the stethoscope hanging against her chest and widened, almost imperceptibly, but she caught it, because reading faces was half her profession. A human, he said, and this time he spoke her language, accented, formal, flawless, and the sound of English in this impossible place made her dizzier than the 2 moons had. Speaking the traveler's tongue, wearing the white healer's garments, his voice dropped, carrying the silver serpent that listens to hearts. The other riders began to murmur, fast, urgent, and unmistakably afraid. One word repeated among them like an echo passed from mouth to mouth, gathering weight each time it landed. SARETH, SARETH, SARETH. The young rider silenced them with a look. Then he swung down from his stag in one fluid motion and approached Lena slowly, deliberately, the way one approaches either a wounded animal or a holy thing. She honestly could not tell which one he believed she was. He stopped 3 paces away. He was tall, the way all of them were tall, and this close she could see that his perfect stillness was costing him effort. Something underneath it was shaking. Human, he said quietly. Answer me carefully, for more depends on your answer than you can know. In your world, the other world, did a woman come to you? A woman with hair of dark storm curls, his jaw tightened, and eyes of glass? The forest seemed to stop breathing. 12 riders leaned forward in their saddles without moving at all. Lena's mouth went dry. How could you possibly? Did she speak to you? His composure cracked down the middle, and what showed through the crack was not command. It was fear, old fear, worn smooth with handling, like a stone carried for years in a pocket. What did she say? Her exact words, please. She said, Lena swallowed. The whisper crawled back through her memory, cold as the needle she had never gotten to place. She said, now it is your turn. The rider closed his eyes as though her words were a blade he had spent years waiting to feel between his ribs. When he opened them again, they were bright with something suspended exactly halfway between grief and awe. Then it has begun, he said softly. The glass-eyed prophet has chosen. After 30 years of silence, she has finally chosen, and she has chosen you. He turned to his riders and called out in the Elven tongue, and the meaning unfolded in Lena's mind with terrible, unwanted clarity. Ride to the mountain. Wake the beacons. Tell my father. Tell King Erling that the key of SARETH has come at last, and she is human. 2 riders wheeled their stags and vanished eastward between the trees like arrows loosed from the world's largest bow. Wait. Lena stepped forward, and 10 arrows tracked her instantly, and she discovered she no longer cared. 14 hours of night shift, 1 impossible patient, 1 shattered universe. Her capacity for polite terror had been spent. Key? What key? Prophet? Your father? Who are you? Where is this? What is SARETH? The young elf turned back to her, and for the first time, something almost like a smile touched the winter of his face, and it changed him entirely, the way dawn changes a mountain. Nothing moves, and everything is different. SARETH is a river, he said, the only holy thing that every race of this world still agrees upon. As for me, my name is Doramir, son of Erling, prince of the Kant Peaks and the 9 forests of Silvaren. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, an invitation, an apology, and an oath, all folded into one small human gesture that he had clearly learned for occasions he had prayed would never come. And you, Dr. Lena Marlowe, you are either the salvation of 2 worlds or the last mistake this one will ever make. Anyone standing where Lena stood, anyone who has ever been handed a responsibility they never asked for in a place they never chose, would have felt the same impossible pull she felt now. She looked at the offered hand for a long moment, then she took it. His hand was cool and calloused, an archer's hand, and it closed around hers with surprising gentleness. The grip of someone accustomed to holding things that break. Somewhere behind her ribs, in a room she had kept locked for years, a door quietly opened. She told herself it was adrenaline. She was, after all, a doctor. She was very good at naming things wrongly. Far, far to the east, beyond the snowfields of Frost Hollow, where the caravan roads freeze into ribbons of black glass. Beyond the yawning mouths of the hollow deep, where travelers' lanterns go down and do not come back up. Beyond even the smoking edges of the volcano country, where the land forgets how to be land, something ancient stirred in the ash. The country was called Ashvale when anyone dared call it anything. No grass grew there, no bird crossed its sky. The mountains at its heart breathed slow columns of grey into the air, and at their feet, in a fortress of fused black obsidian that no living race remembered being built, a figure in a black cloak stood before a wound in the air itself. The portal hung in the darkness like a tear in a painting. Its edges flickered. Weakly, hungrily, a starving mouth. Feeding it had taken decades. It drank power the way the desert drinks rain, and this world, this thin-blooded world, had so little power left to give it. Crossing it in force was impossible. The attempt would collapse it, or worse, fling them into some unmapped elsewhere between the universes. So they crossed it the only way patience allowed, one by one, wearing borrowed shapes, over months, over years. The deathless could afford patience. The figure raised a long spear. At its tip burned a crystal of deep, pulsing red, the brightest and cruelest light in all of Ilarion. And within that light, images swam like fish under ice, a silver forest, 12 riders, and a small human woman with golden hair and green eyes, reaching out to take the hand of an elven prince. Beneath the black hood, something smiled with a mouth that had not been human for a very long time. So, whispered Morvath, high sorcerer of the Terima, in a voice like ash settling on snow. 30 years, prophet. 30 years of hiding from me between the worlds, and this is your answer. Not an army, not a champion. The red crystal flared, and the image of Lena's face burned at its heart. A healer. He turned from the portal and walked into the dark, and the dark, obediently, walked with him. "Send word to the crossing born," he said to the shadows, and the shadows bowed. "Tell our brothers already on the other side to be patient a little longer, and on this side." The crystal pulsed once, like a heartbeat. "Find me everything that can die between the Kant Peaks and the Holy River. The healer will try to gather the 5 relics. Let us see, little healer." The fortress gates ground open onto the ashen dark. "How much of this world you can save." They rode west as the second moon set, and Lena learned her first lesson about this world before she learned its name. Here, even the silence was alive. She rode behind Doromir on his white stag. There had been a brief, mortifying negotiation about this, conducted entirely through her failure to mount the animal on her own, and beneath the beast's smooth gait she could feel the forest humming up through its hooves. Not sound, exactly. More like the feeling of standing in a hospital basement near the great machines, a vibration under the floor of the world, patient and enormous. "You keep listening," Doromir said over his shoulder. It was not a question. "I keep hearing," Lena answered. "There's a difference." "What is that?" "That, Silverin." He said the word the way other men said the names of their mothers. "The 9 forests are one living thing, root-woven from the western sea to the feet of the Kant Peaks. The trees share water, warning, memory. What one root learns, all roots know." He paused. "It knew you had arrived before we did. That is why we came. Trees told you where to find me. The forest told the wardens told the horns told me." A shrug moved through his armor with a sound like leaves. "Your world has faster messengers, I am told. My world has messengers that fit in your pocket and ruin your sleep." Lena watched a shaft of dawn slide down a trunk wider than her apartment building. "I think I prefer the trees." Riding through Silvarin was like riding through a cathedral that had decided, at some point in its long life, to grow. The golden veins in the silver bark brightened as the sun climbed, until the whole forest glowed faintly from within. Herds of small deer with translucent antlers drifted between the roots. Once, far off between the trunks, Lena saw something enormous and mossy turn its head to watch them pass, slowly, the way mountains would watch, if mountains bothered. It was Doromir who unrolled the world for her, one horizon at a time, as the miles unwound beneath them. "You woke at the western edge of everything," he said, drawing an invisible map in the air with 2 fingers. "Behind us, the 9 forests, and beyond them, the sea no ship crosses. Ahead of us, east and climbing, the Kant Peaks, my father's kingdom, the high halls of the elves. That is where we ride." His finger traveled further. Past the peaks, the land falls into the frost hollow, the white waste, where the roads freeze black and the dwarf holds burn their forges under the ice. South of the roads, the hollow deep, caverns that swallow lantern light and travelers with equal appetite. The Orc clans hold the eastern caves and the red canyons beyond, under their king, Tarek Sai. And past all of that, the land rises again into the far ovals, the grass plains behind the world, hundreds of leagues beyond my father's mountains. The Tarian live there, the tall folk. Something reverent entered his voice. "Giants, your stories would call them, taller than 5 men, though the stories would also call them monsters, and the stories would be wrong. They have not raised a hand in war in 1,000 years. They tend their olive groves and speak to almost no one." "You've left one out," Lena said quietly. His shoulders changed. Even through the armor, she saw it, the specific stillness of a man deciding how much truth a stranger could carry. "The southeast," he said at last, "where the fire mountains smoke and nothing grows. Ashvale." The stag's ears flattened at the word, as if the animal knew it. "The Tarima country. Pray you never learn more of it than the name." And anyone who has ever been told exactly that, "Pray you never learn more," knows precisely how well the praying works. They stopped at midday in a warden post built into the living hollow of a tree, and that was where the wounded scout found them. He came through the trees at a broken gallop, slumped over the neck of a grey stag, and the camp turned into motion around him. Elves lifting him down, calling for water, for bandages, for someone named Ithreni who was, it emerged, half a day's ride away. The scout was young. An arrow had gone through his side below the ribs, and someone had made the very human, very fatal decision to pull it out. Lena was moving before she decided to move. "Lay him flat, head down, legs up." Nobody obeyed, because nobody understood, so she made them understand. She planted herself over the boy, pressed both palms hard against the wound, and looked up into a ring of stunned, gem-colored eyes. He is bleeding to death inside. I can slow it. Doromir, tell them. Doromir told them. What followed was the strangest trauma case of her career. No gloves, no monitors, no team, working by touch and training in a tree older than her entire civilization. She packed the wound with boiled moss the wardens swore by. It smelled of antiseptic, which was either a miracle or a coincidence, and she had stopped bothering to tell those apart. She found the boy's pulse in his throat, counted it, cursed it, elevated his legs on a saddle, and kept pressure until her arms shook. An older elf with a scarred jaw, Captain Valis, first of the riders, who had not stopped watching Lena since the clearing, and not warmly, crouched across the boy's body from her. He is warded, Valis said flatly. The wound is clean of poison. Our songs will close it in 3 days. He doesn't have 3 days. He has about 30 minutes of blood volume left, and songs don't stack shelves in a vein. Lena kept her voice level, trauma bay level, the voice that made proud men obey. You can distrust me after he's stable. Right now, lift when I say lift. For a long second, the captain's grey eyes measured her, and Lena understood exactly what was on the scales. Not her skill, her species. Then Valis lifted when she said lift. The boy lived. By dusk, his color had returned, his pulse had steadied under Lena's fingers, and the wardens of the tree post were looking at her the way farmers look at rain after a drought, with a hope so bare it was almost rude. Word travels strangely in a forest that shares one root system. By nightfall, Lena would later learn, half of Silvarin knew that the human in white had reached into a dying elf and told death to wait. Valis found her washing her hands in a rain barrel, said nothing for a while, and then said the most words she would ever hear him say at once. 30 years ago, I swore an oath about the next human I met. He studied his own scarred hands. You are going to make my oath very complicated. He walked away before she could ask. If you have ever earned respect in a room that wanted you to fail, you know it never comes with an explanation. It comes with a debt. The fire that night burned silver blue. Some resin the wardens fed it, and Lena sat close, her scrubs finally traded for a traveling cloak, her stethoscope still around her neck because taking it off felt like taking off her name. Doromir sat down across the flames, uninvited and somehow not intruding, and for a while they said nothing, in the comfortable way of two people who have watched the same patient live. You have questions, he said finally. You have been very disciplined about them. It is unsettling. Triage, Lena said. You treat the bleeding before the broken. Fine. She looked at him through the blue fire. The woman with glass eyes. Your riders said a name, SARETH. Valis mentioned 30 years and an oath, and you knew what she whispered to me before I told you the words. So. Her voice did what it did over dying patients. It went very calm. Who is she? What is she? And what happened to whoever she chose before me? Doromir was quiet long enough that a log settled in the fire. SARETH was born an elf, he said. Long ago, before my father's father. She was a healer, like you. The songs say she was the finest we ever made. And when the Terima came out of the ash in my grandfather's time and set the world to burning, it was SARETH who found the way to end them, and it cost her everything a person can pay and still be walking around afterward. He fed a twig to the flames. She does not live in the world anymore, Lena. Not properly. She lives between here and there, between your world and mine, in the crack the portal made. Her eyes are glass because she looks in both directions at once, forever, and she chooses people. She finds the one soul she believes can close the wound. She crosses over, wearing what flesh she can hold together, and she brings them back with a word. It has happened twice in living memory. His jaw tightened. You are the second. And the first. The fire cracked. Somewhere in the dark, a stag stamped. The first, Doromir said carefully, is why my father will not be pleased to see you. It is why Valis has an oath. It is why the horns tonight will sound a warning across the Kant peaks and not a welcome. He met her eyes, and in the blue light his own had gone the color of deep water. And it is not my story to tell you before the king does. I am sorry, truly, but you should sleep, doctor. Tomorrow you climb the mountain. And my father has been waiting 30 years to be angry at someone like you. And just when the fire had made the night feel almost safe, that was the moment Lena understood she was not being rescued. She was being delivered. She did not sleep for a long time. She lay under a borrowed cloak and stared up through the canopy at the two moons, and for the first time since the grass, she let herself do the arithmetic she had been refusing all day. It was Tuesday at home, or it had been. Her shift ended at 7. Someone would have covered it by now, sworn at her voicemail, filed a report. By Thursday, there would be police in her small apartment, standing among her unread novels, calling her a missing person, her mother would be told. Her mother, who already lost one thing she loved to that hospital, in a white room 11 years ago, holding Lena's hand while the monitors did what monitors do. "You became a doctor so it would never happen to anyone else on your watch," said the honest voice she usually kept sedated. "And now you're on a watch the size of a world." Strangely, and she examined the feeling twice, clinically, checking it for fractures, underneath the fear and the grief and the vertigo, there was something else. Something that had not existed at 2:47 that morning, standing over a cold coffee in a humming hallway. She felt necessary, not useful, necessary. And some quiet, appalling part of her had been starving for that feeling for years. She fell asleep to the sound of the forest breathing and did not dream of home. They climbed for 2 days. On the first evening, at a way station cut into the cliff where the pines gave up, they were met by a rider coming down, a tall elf woman with ash-blonde braids and the permanently unimpressed expression that Lena recognized instantly, joyfully, across species and worlds, a fellow senior clinician. This was Ithrene, healer of the Western Wardens, who had ridden half a day to see the boy everyone claimed a human had pulled back across the river of the dead. She examined the scout in silence, peeled back Lena's moss packing, studied it, smelled it, and then examined Lena with precisely the same expression. "You put pressure on the vessel and packed the channel," Ithrene said. "You raised his legs to keep the blood where the blood was needed. You counted his heart at the throat." It was neither question nor praise. It was a colleague confirming a chart. "And your moss is a coagulant and a mild antiseptic," Lena answered in the same tone. "I'd love to know which compound. In my world, we'd charge him a month's wages for the synthetic version." Something moved at the corner of the elf's mouth that in a lesser being might have become a smile. She reached into her satchel and pressed a linen packet into Lena's hands. Dried moss, a bone needle, gut thread, and a small stoppered vial that glowed faintly like the trees. "Songs for the spirit, herbs for the flesh, and hands for the hour when both fail," Ithrene said. "We have a saying, a healer's true country is the wound. Whatever else you are, human, whatever they decide you are up there." She nodded once at the white peaks, and there was a warning folded inside the gift. "You and I are countrywomen. Remember it when the ice court forgets." She was gone down the mountain before dawn. Lena carried the satchel the rest of the climb like a passport. The 9 forests thinned into pine, the pine into stone, and the stone into a road that switchbacked up the flank of the Kant peaks like a scar of silver thread. The air went thin and bright. Below them, Silverin spread out to the edge of sight, a sea of gold-veined green. Above them, the mountains stood in ranked white summits, and on the highest shoulder of the nearest, Lena's breath simply stopped. Kantalar. The Elven capital was not built on the mountain, it was built of it. Towers drawn up out of the living rock like candle flames frozen mid-flicker, bridges of pale stone flung between spires with an arrogance that ignored gravity entirely, and over it all, waterfalls that fell from the glacier heights and were caught, mid-fall, in channels of crystal, so that the whole city wore its rivers like jewelry. Lights moved in the towers. Horns, the deep bronze horns she now knew, rolled their warning from peak to peak, and the sound came back off the mountains changed, harmonized, as if the range itself was singing bass. 10,000 years, Doromir said quietly, watching her face instead of the city. "And you are the first human to see it in 30. The gates were ivory pale and 40 feet high, carved with a single vast relief, a river and 5 stars set along its length, and a 6th star, inverted, jagged, being drowned beneath the water by many joined hands." Lena stared at it as they passed beneath. "The river is SARETH," she said. "Isn't it? And the 5 stars?" "Later," Doromir murmured, and it was not coldness in his voice. It was fear, wearing courtesy. Inside, the city watched her pass in silence. Elves lined the crystal-channeled streets, thousands of them, beautiful and grave, and not one spoke, and not one looked away. Mothers turned children's faces toward her, deliberately, the way you make a child look at something they will need to remember. An old elf woman touched her own eyes with 2 fingers as Lena passed, then touched her heart. Lena had no idea if it was a blessing or a curse, and from the faces around her, the city wasn't sure either. They rode up through terraces of hanging gardens where the waterfalls had been braided into fountains, past forges that burned white and silent, past a great open amphitheater where hundreds of young elves stood frozen mid-song, their rehearsal abandoned, every face turned toward her like flowers toward an eclipse. On the highest terrace, an honor guard in ice-pale armor fell in around them without a word, and Lena noticed that their spears were not ceremonial. They were angled inward. "Doramir," she said quietly. "Am I a guest or a prisoner?" "In Canthalar," he answered, just as quietly, and with a bitterness that told her the words were older than this moment. "There has never once been a difference. Everyone who has ever walked into a room where their reputation arrived first knows that silence. It is the sound of a verdict not yet read aloud." The throne hall of Canthalar was carved into the mountain's heart, a vault so high that clouds of incense drifted under its ceiling like weather. Pillars of rose-veined stone marched toward a dais of black glacier ice that never melted, and upon it, on a throne grown from a single colossal crystal, sat the king. The court had assembled to see her, lords of the 9 forest houses in robes of layered green, war captains with Vaelus's same scarred stillness, white-robed lore-masters clutching scroll cases like shields, and on the left of the dais, conspicuously, unmissably, an empty chair, smaller than the throne, wrought of the same crystal, draped in a grey cloth that had been folded with the terrible neatness of a ritual performed for 30 years. No one stood near it, no one looked at it, which meant, of course, that everyone was looking at it, all the time, with the backs of their eyes. Lena filed it the way she filed symptoms, presenting complaint, a kingdom, visible injury, one empty chair. Erling of the Kant Peaks was winter given a body. His hair was long and white silver, his circlet a plain band of iron in a hall of crystal, and Lena registered the choice like a symptom, and his eyes were Doromir's eyes with all the green frozen out of them. He was old, the way the mountains outside were old, not weakened by it, made of it. And against his chest, on a chain of woven silver, hung a crystal the size of a child's fist, colorless at first glance, and then, as Lena's eyes adjusted, not colorless at all. It held light inside it that did not come from the hall. It pulsed, slowly, like the forest, like breathing. She knew, with a certainty that bypassed thought entirely, that she was looking at the first of the 5. "So." The king's voice was quiet and carried like frost-cracking stone. "The between which reaches into the other world a second time, and this is what her glass eyes chose, a small human." His gaze moved over the scrubs, the cloak, the stethoscope, and stopped on her face. "A healer, they tell me. She does have a bitter sense of humor, our SARETH. She had it the last time, too." "Father," Doramir began. "You will be silent." Erling did not raise his voice, and the entire hall flinched anyway. He rose from the crystal throne, descended one step of black ice, and the pendant at his chest pulsed once, brighter, as if it recognized something in the room. "Human, Doctor, Lena Marlowe of the other world. Before this court decides what you are, you will hear what the last one was. You will hear what the first chosen of SARETH did in these halls 30 years ago, what he swore, what we gave him, and what he left us." The king's hand closed slowly around the pendant, knuckles whitening, and for one unguarded instant, Lena saw it. Not anger. Under 30 years of ice, grief, still bleeding. "And then," said Erling, king of the Kant Peaks, "you will understand why the last human who stood where you are standing was my eldest son." The hall went silent as a held breath. Lena heard Doramir make a sound behind her, small, involuntary. The sound of a wound touched without warning, and she understood, in the space of a single heartbeat, 3 things at once: that Doramir had not always been the heir, that the gate's carved river and its 5 drowned stars were a memorial as much as a map, and that whatever the first chosen one had done, this family had buried a name because of it. "Tell me," Lena said. The king's eyes glittered like the far side of winter. "Bring in the remembrancer," he said to the hall. "Let her hear it all. And then God's help us." His gaze fixed on Lena with the weight of a mountain deciding whether to fall. We will see whether history rhymes or repeats. Section 3. The remembrancer was the oldest living thing Lena had ever seen. She entered the hall between 2 attendants, A figure so slight she seemed folded out of paper, robed in white, so ancient it had gone the color of moonlight on bone. Her eyes were closed. Lena would learn they were always closed. A remembrancer gives up her own seeing on the day of her investiture, because her work is to see for everyone else. Around her neck, on a cord of braided silver, hung a smooth sphere of grey crystal, clouded like a cataract. The court knelt. Even the king inclined his head. Lena, unsure of the etiquette and unwilling to fake a reverence she didn't understand, settled for standing very still, which, from the flicker of grim amusement on Velas's face, was apparently the most human thing she had done yet. Child of the other world. The remembrancer's voice was small and dry, and it reached every corner of that enormous hall without effort, the way a single drop of ink reaches every part of a glass of water. You ask what the first chosen did, but asking is hearing, and hearing is forgetting. In Cantalar, we do not tell our history. She lifted the clouded sphere. We return to it. The crystal woke. Light poured out of it, not upward, not outward, but into the air itself, and the incense clouds beneath the ceiling caught that light and became a canvas, and the canvas became a world. Lena's breath left her. The entire vault of the throne hall had become a memory, wrapped around the court in every direction. The same hall, 30 years younger, torchlit, crowded, and standing where Lena stood now, in the memory's center, a human man. He was perhaps 40, broad-shouldered, dark-bearded, wearing the ruin of a grey uniform Lena half recognized from documentaries, a soldier's uniform from a war 2 generations before her own. His face was exhausted and clever and kind, and Lena hated, instantly and uselessly, how much she wanted to trust it. His name, said the remembrancer, was Rowan Voss. The memory moved, and the court of the present stood inside the past like ghosts at their own feast. They watched SARETH's first choosing the way Lena's world watched old film reels. Rowan Voss, waking in the western grass as Lena had woken. A younger Erling, dark-haired then and capable of smiling, receiving him with suspicion that thawed, overturning seasons of memory into something no one in the hall could bear to name now. They watched Rowan learn the bow and the tongue and the roads. They watched him carry a plague-stricken elf child 11 miles through a blizzard to the healers of the middle terrace, and stand afterward in the snow, coatless, shaking, refusing thanks. They watched Erling's daughter teach him to read. Her name was Lyriel, and the memory loved her the way memories love the dead, every image of her slightly brighter than the images around it. She was silver-haired like her father, and laughed like her mother, whom the plague had taken, and she moved through those 30-year-old scenes trailing the eye of everyone in them. Beside Lena, in the darkened present, Doromir had gone perfectly, terribly still. In the memory, he was a child, chasing his sister's hem through the hanging gardens. In the 4th year, the remembrancer said, the king performed the rite of the offered branch. Understand what this means, child of the other world. We are a long-lived people, and children come to us rarely, and adoption is not paperwork among the elves. It is grafting. It is the tree accepting a foreign branch as its own living wood. The memory showed it. Rowan Voss kneeling on the black ice dais, Erling's hands on his head, the court singing something that made the hair rise on Lena's arms, 30 years downstream. On that day, Rowan Voss became the king's eldest son, heir before Lyriel, heir before Doromir, who was then a boy of 9 winters. The empty chair beside the dais, Lena realized, draped in grey, folded with ritual neatness for 30 years. They didn't bury his name, she thought, with a chill that had nothing to do with the glacier ice. They kept it a chair, and when the Between Witches purpose ripened, the remembrancer continued. When the roads were mapped and the races sounded and the hour came to gather the 5 holy things and carry them to the river, the king did what no elf king had done in 10,000 years. In the memory, Erling lifted the silver chain from his own neck. The crystal pendant flared in the torchlight. The same pendant, the very same, that hung on the present king's chest 12 feet from where Lena stood. He placed the heart of the elven people into his human son's hands. He gave him the tear of the first tree, the remembrancer said, and Rowan Voss swore the oath of SARETH upon it, to gather the 5, to bind them in the holy river, to close the wound between the worlds. Her dry voice did not change at all, which somehow made what came next unbearable. He rode east on the summer solstice with 12 companions, the flower of the mountain. Lyriel rode at his right hand. The memory changed, And everyone who has ever loved a story knows the exact temperature of the silence that comes before the part where it breaks. Snow. A high pass, somewhere in the eastern cants, the memory ragged and torn now, reconstructed, Lena understood, from fewer and more terrible rememberings. 12 companions camped under an overhang, Rowan Voss standing apart, at the cliff's edge in the blue dark, and out of the empty air in front of him, unfolding like ink dropped in water, a tall shape in a black cloak, leaning on a spear tipped with a crystal of deep, pulsing red. There was no sound in this part of the memory. The remembrancer's crystal had none to give. The court watched Morvath of the Tarima speak to the first chosen for a long time in the falling snow, and watched the first chosen listen, and it was worse without the words, because Lena could read the body the way she read a chart, and what she read in Rowan Voss's shoulders was not fear and was not greed. It was homesickness. We do not know what was promised, the remembrancer said quietly. We know only what was done. On the 9th night of the eastern road, the son of the king rose while his companions slept, took the tear of the first tree from around his own neck where it had been given in love, and walked east, alone, toward Ashvale. The memory became fire and confusion, the 12 waking to betrayal, pursuit through black passes, and then a narrow bridge of ice over a gorge with no visible bottom, and Rowan Voss on the far side of it with the pendant in his fist, and Lyriel. Of course Lyriel, who had taught him to read, who trusted him last and longest, walking out onto that bridge alone with her empty hands raised, still talking to him, still certain of him. Lena wanted, with her whole body, to look away. She didn't. It felt like desertion. They could not hear what Lyriel said. They could see Rowan Voss hesitate, see the pendant pulse in his fist like a second heart, see, far behind him on the eastern cliffs, a red star flare once, impatient, and then the ice bridge broke. The remembrancer's voice, for the first time, took 30 years to cross 4 words. He did not push her. A breath in the darkened hall. He only failed to reach. The memory's last image hung across the ceiling of the world. Rowan Voss on his knees at the broken edge, screaming without sound into the gorge, the pendant's chain snapped in the ice at the lip of the fall, left behind, dropped or discarded or surrendered, no remembering could say, and his own face, turned at last toward the west, toward the home that had grafted him into its living wood. Then he walked east, empty-handed, into the snow, and the snow closed, and no eye of elf, dwarf, orc, or giant has seen the first chosen of SARETH from that night to this. The light poured back into the clouded sphere. The hall was only a hall again, torchless, present, and utterly silent, except for one sound Lena would remember for the rest of both her lives. An old king on a crystal throne, breathing carefully, the way people breathe when they have practiced it for 30 years. The tear was recovered from the ice, Erling said at last. His voice was even. His knuckles, around the pendant, were white. My daughter was not. The alliance Rowan Voss was to weave died in that gorge with her. The dwarves called us fools who arm strangers. The orcs called us worse and truer. Tareksai's father closed the eastern roads. The giants withdrew another 100 leagues. 30 years, human. 30 years, the 5 holy things have sat sundered in 5 sullen lands, and the wound between the worlds has drunk and drunk and drunk. He rose. He descended all the steps of black ice this time, and stopped an arm's length from her, and he was very tall, and Lena did not step back, because stepping back was not a thing her feet had ever learned. And now the between which sends me a second one, the king said softly. Another healer, another human with clever hands and a homesick heart. And I am asked to believe that this time the story ends differently. You're not asked to believe anything, Lena said. A ripple went through the court. Erling's eyes narrowed. Not in anger, she thought, in attention. I've read this chart before, she went on, and her voice found the level it found over dying strangers at 3 in the morning. Patient presence with a 30-year-old wound that was never allowed to close. Everyone in this room is still bleeding from it, you most of all, because you're the one who has to wear the thing your son dropped. Her eyes went, deliberately, to the pendant. I'm not going to stand here and swear I'm better than Rowan Voss. I never met him. I just met all of you. But I'll tell you what I told your riders in the forest, because it's the only oath I've ever taken that I've never broken. I'm not your enemy. And somewhere east of here, there's a thing in a black cloak that is, and every year you spend guarding that necklace from the people trying to help you, it gets 1 year stronger. The silence afterward had weight, like the mountain leaning in. You speak, Erling said at last, exactly as he spoke. Then check my pulse, Lena said. It's the one thing in this hall that can't recite from memory. Somebody, she thought it was Valis, made a sound that in a court less frozen might have been the birth of a laugh. The king turned away. He climbed the black ice and sat, and when he spoke again, it was the voice of the mountain deciding not to fall. Yet, the council of the 9 houses will convene at the next full silver moon. Until then, the human is a guest of Cantalar, a beat, precise as a scalpel. Guests of Cantalar do not leave. Guests of Cantalar are not alone, and the tear of the first tree does not move from my body while I breathe. Doramir. His gaze found his son, and something unreadable crossed it. She saved a warden's life on the western road. She will have the honors of a healer and the watchfulness owed a stranger. See to both, personally. Father. Doramir bowed. If the king noticed that his son had placed himself half a step in front of the human, between her and the entire assembled court, he chose, this once, not to remember it aloud. Her quarters were in the guest spire, a round room of pale stone with a fire that burned blue, a bed like a nest of clouds, and a window with no bars because the window opened onto 800 feet of air. A guard stood outside her door. Politeness, with a spear. Doramir came at moonrise, carrying 2 cups of something hot that smelled of honey and pine, and found her on the balcony, watching the city's braided waterfalls burn silver under the moons. Your sister, Lena said without turning. Lyriel, you were 9. I was 9. He set the cups on the stone rail. For a while the falls filled the silence for them. I am told that in your world, 30 years is long, half a life. Here it is a season. My father still sets 3 places at his private table. He does not know that I know. And Rowan? I loved him, Doramir said simply, and the simplicity was the wound. He taught me the bow. He carried me on his shoulders through the solstice fair. When they tell it in the hall, he is the betrayer, and the telling is true, and I have hunted the eastern passes 12 times in 30 years, and I do not know, even now, his hands closed on the rail, whether I was hunting him to kill him or to ask him why. Lena looked at him then. The winter-carved profile, the deep green eyes fixed east, the crown prince who had become an heir through a broken bridge and had spent 30 years being the second choice of everyone, including, possibly, himself. And she recognized him, not romantically, or not only, though something in her chest was conducting its own examination and refusing to share the results. She recognized him the way she'd recognized Ithreni, a colleague, another person on permanent night shift, holding pressure on a wound that wasn't theirs. For what it's worth, she said, in my professional opinion, homesickness isn't a character flaw, it's a symptom. Morvath didn't corrupt your brother with evil, he corrupted him with home. She wrapped her cold hands around the hot cup, which means I'm going to be the hardest patient he's ever had. Because the woman with the glass eyes took me from a cold coffee, an empty apartment, and a Tuesday I was dreading. Doramir turned. The moonlight did something to his face that she filed away, clinically, for later, under a heading she declined to name. Then what do you miss? He asked quietly. Ask me again, Lena said, when I've stopped feeling guilty that the answer is almost nothing. If you have ever stood beside someone at the exact moment loneliness recognized loneliness, you know that neither of them looked away, and neither of them called it anything, yet. The days of her polite imprisonment developed, against all odds, a shape. It began with the guard outside her door, a young soldier named Phelan, with a poorly hidden cough that Lena diagnosed through the door on the second morning, and treated, over his scandalized objections, with Ithreni's herbs and a steam tent improvised from a wash basin and her traveling cloak. By the third morning, Phelan could breathe through both lungs for the first time in a season. By the fourth morning, there were 2 more guards at her door, neither of them assigned there, both of them coughing with suspicious theatrical commitment. By the 7th morning, the healers of the middle terrace sent a formal request to the guest spire, phrased with excruciating courtly delicacy, which Doramir translated with the first full grin she had ever seen on him. They are asking, he said, whether the human would care to come and show them the thing with the pressing and the counting and the legs. The thing with the pressing and the counting and the legs. 12 years, 2 degrees, and 100,000 hours of her life, and Lena had never heard her profession described better, so she went, and she kept going. The healing halls of Kanthalar were carved into the mountain's southern face, full of light and falling water, and the elven healers were superb at everything slow. Herbs, songs, the knitting of bone over patient weeks, and startlingly helpless before everything fast. They could regrow a shattered hip in a month and lose a young mother to a bleed in 10 minutes. Their word for emergency translated, literally, as the hour that does not negotiate, and they said it the way Lena's colleagues said Code Blue. Quietly and with dread. Lena could not give them monitors or blood banks. She gave them what she had: pressure points and packing, the recovery position, the count at the throat, splints, sutures, the cold arithmetic of triage. She taught with her hands and her stethoscope, and Doromir's patient translating, and the elf healers, 1,000 years old, some of them, took notes like first-year residents, and one of them wept, without shame, when Lena showed them how a person with 2 hands and no magic at all could keep a stopped heart moving from the outside. Where was this knowledge? The old healer asked. 30 years ago, when the plague came to the Middle Terrace. In my world, Lena said, being invented. Mostly by people who'd lost someone to the hour that does not negotiate. And somewhere in those days, she could not have charted the exact moment. Kanthalar stopped watching her and started seeing her. Children of the lower terraces took to trailing her through the streets at a solemn distance, daring each other to touch the silver serpent that listened to hearts. She let them, one by one, listen to their own heartbeats, and watched a 500-year-old city discover, child by child, that it was full of drums. Violis appeared at dawn on the 9th day, wordless, and taught her to hold a knife in a way that was not a scalpel's way. When she asked why, he said only, "Because my oath is complicated," and corrected her grip. The evening meals grew warmer. The spears of her honor guard angled, imperceptibly, outward. She was still a prisoner. The council still loomed at the silver moon. The king still watched her from the black ice with 30 years of winter in his eyes. But on the 12th night, walking back from the healing halls with her escort through streets that now murmured greetings, past the fountain where the children drummed their chests at her in salute, Lena caught herself doing something she had not done since the grass at the edge of the world. She caught herself thinking of her round stone room with its blue fire and its impossible window as home, and that, as everyone who has ever fallen for a place, or a person, or a life they were only supposed to be passing through will tell you, that is precisely the moment when you have the most to lose. It was on the 14th night of her polite imprisonment that Lena noticed the thing about Lord Maythor. He was one of the 9, lord of the easternmost forest house, a tall, gracious elf with amber eyes who had, across those 2 weeks, repeatedly sought her out at the evening meal to ask gentle, well-made questions about the other world. He was charming. He was interested. He listened with his whole body, the way very few people listen. And on the 14th night, as he leaned across the candles to refill her cup with his own hand, a signal honor, Doromir had murmured, Lena's eyes did what 12 years of triage had trained them to do without permission. They read him. Candlelight on the throat, the little rhythm under the jaw, the flicker of the carotid that every living human, every living elf, she had checked, she had treated one, carries like a signature. Lord Maythor's throat was still. Not calm. Still. Still like the woman on the gurney at 2:58 in the morning had been strong, like something wearing a body and wearing it very, very well. He caught her looking. He smiled, warm as the candles, and he did not blink. Lena smiled back, the steady, unreadable smile of a doctor delivering no news at all, and lifted her cup and drank nothing, and thought of a gurney at 2:58 in the morning, and of a voice like ash on snow that Doromir had prayed she would never learn more of than the name. They crossed one by one. Sarethiel's burns had spelled on a stranger's arms, wearing borrowed shapes. One of them was sitting at the king's table, 14 feet from the tier of the first tree, and it knew that she knew. Section 4. There is no lonelier moment in medicine than knowing something the room refuses to know. Lena had lived it before. The resident who spots the shadow on the scan that 3 seniors have signed off. The intern who smells the infection under the clean dressing. You learn quickly that being right is not enough. Being right without being believed is just a slower way of watching the disaster arrive. She found Doromir at the archery terraces an hour after the candles of Maythor's dinner had burned down, and she told him everything in the flat, ordered voice of a handover report. The still throat, the unblinking eyes, the 14 days of gentle, well-made questions about the other world. Questions, she realized now, reciting them back, that had all been the same question wearing different clothes. How did you cross? What did the crossing feel like? What do you remember of the space between? Tareema questions. Portal questions. Doromir listened with an arrow still knocked and forgotten in his hand. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time, and she watched the war happen behind his face. Because he believed her, she could see that he believed her, and she could also see exactly how much the believing cost. Lord Mathor of House Valinor, he said at last, slowly, like a man testing river ice with his weight, has sat on the Council of Nine for 600 years. He fought at my grandfather's side against the Tareema in the Sundering War. He carried my mother's bier. Lena, his house holds the Eastern Watch. He is the shield between Canthalar and Ashvale. Then either I'm wrong, Lena said, or the shield has been hollow for God knows how long, and everything the Eastern Watch has seen for years has been written by the enemy. She let that land. Doromir, when did House Valinor last report Tareema movement? The arrow came slowly off the string. Never, he said quietly. In 30 years, not once. We took it for peace. In my work, we have a saying about the quietest bed on the ward. Lena's jaw set. It's quiet because nobody's checked. But here, the second illness set in. The one she'd known was coming. Proof. A human stranger in Canthalar on sufferance, accusing a Lord of the Nine on the evidence of a throat she'd glanced at by candlelight. Doromir laid it out without flinching. The word of the second chosen against 600 years of service in a court still bleeding from the first chosen. If she spoke and failed, it would not merely end her. It would end the council's deliberation in a single stroke. The humans SARETH sends come to divide us. Mathor wouldn't even need to defend himself. Her accusation would do his work for him. So we don't accuse, Lena said. We test. In my world, when we can't trust what a patient tells us, we run diagnostics the disease can't lie to. She looked up at the moonlit spires. What does this world have that a Tareema can't fake? Doromir's eyes changed. Winter, thinking. Memory, he said. But Mathor moved first. He did not accuse her. That was the elegance of it. The 600-year Polish. He merely began, the following morning, to worry about her, aloud, gently, to exactly the right ears. Lena reconstructed the campaign afterward, the way she reconstructed an infection from a fever chart. To the lawmasters, a scholarly concern about what the crossing might do to a human mind, whether the poor creature could distinguish her memories from her dreams. To the war captains, a soldier's musing on how conveniently the second chosen had arrived, just as the Eastern Watch reported 30 years of peace, almost as if something wished the elves to doubt their own shield. To the healing halls, most poisonous of all because most plausible, a patron's regret that the humans' foreign techniques, however dazzling, had never been proven over an elven lifetime, and what a tragedy if the Middle Terraces learned that too late. By the second evening, Lena's honor guard had been doubled, and its spears angled inward again. By the third, 2 of the 9 houses had petitioned the king to move the council forward, to decide the human status before the silver moon. Before, as the petition put it with courtly venom, further attachment complicates justice. The children still drummed their chests at her by the fountain. Their mothers had begun pulling them back by the hand. Anyone who has ever watched a rumor outrun the truth knows the particular helplessness of it. The truth walks on evidence, and the rumor just flies. He came to her once, in those 3 days. He found her on the Healing Hall's south balcony, alone for the length of a breath between lessons, and he stood beside her at the rail in the sun, amber-eyed, gracious, and looked out over the terraces of the city he had watched over for 600 years. They are a remarkable people, Lord Mathor said, so old and still so trusting. It is their loveliest flaw. He turned to her and smiled with warmth that reached everything except the stillness beneath his jaw. You have keen eyes, Doctor. In my experience, keen eyes live longest when they are also patient ones. The council will meet soon. I do so hope it goes gently for you. Thank you, Lena said. Get some rest, my lord. You look dead on your feet. Something flickered behind the amber, the first honest expression she had ever seen him wear, there and gone, like a fin breaking dark water. How kind, said the thing at the rail, and withdrew, unblinking, into the sun-warmed corridors of the trusting city. Her hands didn't shake until he was out of sight. She allowed them exactly 10 seconds. Then she went to find Doromir, because the test could no longer wait for caution. The Remembrancer received them in her cell at the top of the Lawmaster's tower, a round room bare of everything except a chair, a window, and the clouded sphere on its silver cord. She listened to Doromir's careful question with her blind face tilted like a bird's. "You wish to know if the stone can hold him," she said. "You are asking the right question, Prince, and you are asking it 30 years late." Her dry little voice did not accuse, it simply weighed. "Understand what memory is, children. Memory is the world agreeing that a thing was present. The stone does not record light or sound. It records presence, and the Tarima, her hands folded around the sphere, are not present, not truly. They are absence, folded into the shape of a person. When the stone drinks a hall, it drinks everyone in the hall. Around a Tarima, it drinks a whole." Lena's pulse jumped. The memory in the throne hall, 30 years ago, Rowan's adoption, the feasts, the court. Maethor fought beside the king's father. He must be in those rememberings. "He is," said the Remembrancer. 600 years of him. "Then we need something recent," Doromir said. "Has the stone drunk any hall, any gathering, since the human came?" The Remembrancer smiled, and it was ancient and small and slightly terrifying. "Child," she said, "what do you imagine I do at feasts?" She lifted the sphere, and the round cell filled with the memory of the great dinner 4 nights past. Candles, music, the long table of the 9, Lena's own face startlingly strange to her from the outside, Erling at the head, Doromir at his right, and at the third seat of the left side, where Lord Maethor of House Valinor had leaned across the candles and refilled Lena's cup with his own hand, where 40 living witnesses had seen him laugh and speak and listen with his whole body. The memory held a seated shadow, a man-shaped nothing, a hole in the world, politely holding a wine jug. Nobody breathed. Then the Remembrancer closed her hand, and the feast went back into the stone, and her blind face turned toward the window, toward the eastern peaks, with an expression Lena would only understand much later. 30 years, the old elf whispered. "I have drunk this city's days, and told myself the flaws were in my stone. Prince Doromir, wake your father." That was when the horns began to scream. Not the bronze horns of the passes. Lena knew those now, their long, moonlit patience. These were higher, faster, raw, the alarm horns of the citadel itself, and they were coming from the king's spire, and even as the 3 of them turned, the great golden veins in the living rock of Cantalar, the light of the mountain that pulsed slow and patient, as breathing, always, everywhere, went out. Darkness fell on the city like a dropped cloak. And in the darkness, from the direction of the king's spire, something screamed in a voice that no throat of elf or human had ever owned. A sound like tearing metal and burning wind. A sound Lena's body recognized before her mind did, because her body had heard its whisper once, at 2:58 in the morning, in a voice like ash on snow. The same family of sound. The same country of sound. Doromir was already running. Lena ran after him, and behind them, unhurried in the way of the very old, the Remembrancer walked to her window and began, quietly, to sing to the mountain. The run through the dying city would come back to her for years in fragments, streets she knew by their murmured greetings, gone black and shouting. The braided waterfalls still falling, silver by moonlight alone, suddenly the loudest thing in the world. A mother in a doorway pulling 2 children behind her, and the smaller one, a boy who 3 days ago had listened to his own heartbeat through her stethoscope and laughed, pounding his little fist against his chest at her as she ran past, twice, fiercely, drums, drums. The salute of the lower terraces. She carried it up 800 steps like a second wind. Twice, guards moved to stop the running human in the dark, and twice, Doromir's voice cut them down to statues. The heir's command tone, which she had never heard from him before, and which sounded like his father's, and which, she noted even at a dead run, because noticing was the one thing she had never been able to turn off. He hated using. The king's spire was chaos in the dark, guards colliding, blue emergency flames guttering in wall sconces, and on the great stair, the first bodies. Not dead, Lena registered on the run, triaging by torchlight, asleep. Dropped mid-stride, weapons still in hands, chests rising slow and deep, spellwork. The whole spire had been put down like a ward at midnight, and the only reason she and Doromir were still moving was that they had been outside its reach when it fell. The doors of the king's chambers stood open. Wrong. Everything about it wrong. The honor guard folded unconscious across the threshold like discarded coats. Inside, by the light of one blue flame, Erling, king of the Kant Peaks, on his knees in the center of the floor, silver hair loose, one hand clamped to his chest, and standing over him, gracious and amber-eyed and terribly, finally still, Lord Maethor of House Valinor. Except the stillness was spreading now, unwrapping. The court robes hung wrong on a frame that was forgetting to pretend shoulders. The candle-warm face had gone smooth and patient as a whole, and in his lifted hand, where 600 years of memory had never once put it, a shard of crystal burned deep, pulsing red. The same red Lena had seen flare on an eastern cliff in a 30-year-old memory, impatient above a breaking bridge. Second chosen. The voice was still Maethor's voice, which was the worst thing in the room. It was still gracious. You read bodies beautifully. I did wonder at dinner what my throat had told you. The red shard turned lazily toward the kneeling king. His Majesty and I were just discussing history. He is so rich in it. Step away from my patient, Lena said. Afterward, Doromir would tell her that this was the moment, not the balcony, not the healing halls, the moment he lost the war he had been quietly fighting since a clearing in Silvaran. A small human woman, unarmed, in borrowed clothes, walking toward a terima across a dark floor, in the voice that made proud men obey. The thing wearing Maethor laughed, and then several things happened in the same second. Doromir's arrow took the creature through the wrist of its raised hand, a shot threaded through darkness and a doorway that harpers would fail to exaggerate for 100 years. The red shard spun free across the floor. The creature turned, and its shape tore open like wet paper, robes and false flesh unraveling around a tall column of black cloak and colder black inside it. And it moved, not ran, moved, the way spilled ink moves. And the wall of the king's chamber where it struck did not break so much as unremember itself, stone forgetting stone in a ragged doorway of dark. The shard, Doromir lunged. No! The remembrancer's voice, impossibly, from everywhere, riding the mountain's veins, and the golden light of Canthalar came back on all at once, every vein in every wall flooding not gold now, but white, furnace white, the mountain awake. And where the fleeing absence crossed that light on the outer terrace, it shrieked, staggered, folded in on itself, and went over the parapet into 800 feet of night. Falling, it did not tumble as bodies tumble. It came apart, the way smoke does. By the time the dark reached the middle terraces, there was nothing left of Lord Maethor of House Valinor, Shield of the East, but an empty chair at a council table and 600 years of memory with a hole in it. Lena did not watch it fall. Lena was already on her knees on the cold floor, doing her job. The king was grey, pulse fast, thin, wrong. She found the wound over his heart, a single puncture no wider than a needle, bloodless, its edges faintly luminous with a red that had no business inside a body. Around it, under the skin, fine dark lines were crawling outward, slow as frost growing on a window. She had seen burns like writing on a curly-haired stranger. This was the same alphabet. Stay with me. She got him flat, got his legs up on a fallen chair, pressed her stethoscope to his chest, and heard a heart fighting something that was not blood loss, and not poison, and not anything with a page in any book she had trained from. Doromir, Ithren's satchel, the vial, the glowing one, go. Erling's eyes found her face. 30 years of winter, cracked open at last, and underneath the ice, she had seen it once before, for an instant, in the throne hall, grief. But also, now, something else, something urgent. Healer. His voice was a thread. His hand closed on her wrist. The second time in one lifetime a dying grip had claimed that wrist, and Lena's blood went cold with the symmetry. Listen, the shard, it spoke to me. Before you came, it gloated. They are old and vain, and they gloat. A breath, fought for and won. It did not come for the tear. 30 years. It sat at my table and never once reached for the tear. Don't talk, breathe. Listen. The frost lines crawled another fraction of an inch, and the king of the Kant Peaks used what they left him to say 4 sentences, and Lena would hear them in the dark for the rest of her life. They do not fear the 5 things gathered. They fear the hand that binds them. It did not stay for my necklace, healer. It stayed to see your face, and tonight it went home wearing it. His eyes rolled back. The monitors of her old life would have been screaming. There was only her hands, her count, the blue fire, and far below, a city of 10,000 years waking in terror to light and horns. Dawn came up over a changed Cantalar. The king lived. Lena had fought the frost lines through the black hours with everything two worlds could give her. Ithrene's glowing vial, the remembrances low singing through the mountain's veins, and her own hands keeping the count when his heart forgot it, twice, each time for longer. By first light, the crawling dark under his skin had stopped crawling. It had not retreated. It lay there, quiet, like a siege army that has decided it can afford to wait. And Lena, grayer than her patient, wrote in the strange ledger of her mind the truest chart note of her career. Condition stabilized. Condition not understood. The city below did not have even that much comfort. The 9 houses were an overturned hive. House Velinor's compound had been sealed at moonset, and what the war captains found in its archive turned the morning cold. 30 years of the Eastern Watch, every patrol log, every scout report, every quiet frontier dispatch, written in the same tireless, gracious hand. There had been no watch. There had been a story of a watch, told patiently for a generation, while behind it the passes to Ashvale stood open and unobserved and dark. "We are blind in the east," Violis reported flatly to the Council of 8 in a hall whose 9th chair had joined the other empty one, and Lena, summoned to testify and too tired to be diplomatic, heard the true size of it settle over the lords like ash. Not one infiltrator caught. One infiltrator found, after 30 years, by accident, by a foreign healer's glance at a throat. The question no one asked aloud stood in the room with them anyway, patient and unblinking. How many holes does the memory of this world have, and what shape are they wearing this morning? Doramir found her at last on the terrace outside the king's chambers, in the thin gold light, and for a while they stood the way they had stood over the wounded scout. 2 people on the same shift, too tired for anything but the truth. "You saved him," he said. "I stalled it," Lena said. "There's a difference, and the difference is the whole problem. That wound is a message, Doramir. It's the same writing that was on Sarethiel's arms. Your father's body is a letter now, and I can't read the language, and the only ones who can are the ones who wrote it." She closed her eyes. The 2 moons were still faintly visible, fading in the morning blue, and she was so far from a Tuesday. "And the last thing he told me before he went under." She stopped. Below them, the waterfalls braided their silver down through a city, relearning fear. "Tell me," Doramir said. So she told him. The gloating shard. 30 years at the king's table, without one reach for the tear. They do not fear the 5 things gathered. They fear the hand that binds them. "It stayed to see my face," Lena finished quietly, "and it went home wearing it. Whatever Morvath wanted from Cantalar, Doramir, he already has it. He's had it since dinner 4 nights ago. It was never the necklace." She looked up, green eyes in the grey morning, and said the thing that would drag the council, the quest, and both their hearts into the fire of the book's final hours. "It was me." Doramir did not answer at once. He reached out instead, slowly, the way she had once watched him approach a holy thing in a clearing, and closed his hand over hers on the cold stone rail, and left it there. And the morning went on around 2 people who had each spent a lifetime being the one who holds, discovering what it was to be held. "Then he knows your face," Doramir said at last, very quietly, and the winter in his voice had a blade in it now. "Good. Let him study it well. It is the last face his kind will ever choose wrongly." Somewhere east of everything, in a country of ash, a red crystal at the tip of a spear flared once, and began, with a craftsman's patience, to remember a small human face with green eyes.
Section 5. The Council of the 9 Houses met at noon, 3 days after the night of the falling dark, in a hall with 2 empty chairs and a king who could not stand. They had wanted to meet without Erling entirely. That was the first battle, fought before Lena ever entered the room, and she heard about it only in the careful spaces between Doromir's words. The lords of the Western Houses had proposed with impeccable concern that His Majesty's recovery not be burdened, that a regent's voice speak for the crown, that the regency naturally follow the old forms. The old forms. Doramir said the 2 words the way Lena's colleagues used to say hospital administration. Erling's answer had been carried down from the royal spire by a healer with a carefully blank face. The king would attend if he had to be nailed to his chair, and any lord who objected was invited to come upstairs and discuss it with him personally, alone, at his bedside. No lord had accepted. Lena, hearing this, revised her prognosis of her patient sharply upward. The frost writing had his heart under siege. It clearly hadn't reached whatever organ produced that. So at noon they carried the king of the Kant Peaks into the Hall of the Nine on a chair of white cedar, wrapped to the throat against a cold no one else could feel, the tear of the first tree pulsing slow against his breastbone, and if his face was gray and his hands were thin, his eyes when they swept the 8 remaining lords were entirely, dangerously alive. The gray-draped chair kept its 30-year vigil at his left. The chair of House Valinor stood at his right, naked, undraped, its emptiness 3 days old and somehow louder. Lena stood where the accused stand, in the center of the white floor, in the eye of the 9, the 8, and understood, with the strange calm that always found her when the stakes stopped being survivable, that this room was about to decide the rest of her life in a language she'd been speaking for a month. If you have ever stood in front of a panel that held your whole future in its hands, the interview, the tribunal, the jury, you know that the body goes very quiet, and the mind, treacherously, notices everything. She noticed this. Of the 8 lords, 3 would not look at her at all, 2 could not stop, and 1, the Lady Nereveth of the southern shore forests, oldest of the 8, with eyes like green sea glass, was not looking at Lena, or at the king, but at the naked chair of House Valinor, with an expression Lena couldn't chart. She filed it. Noticing was the thing she had never been able to turn off. The arguments against her took 2 hours, and they were good. That was the terrible part. She'd expected malice, and instead, she got reason. Lord Cale of the High Passes, who had lost 2 brothers in the Sundering War, laid it out like a man building a wall stone by stone. The first chosen had also been beloved. The first chosen had also saved lives, learned the tongue, earned the city. Every argument for trusting Lena Marlowe had been made before, word for word, in this hall. For Rowan Voss, the Remembrancer's stone could replay the debates, and the overlap would shame them all. Sarathiel's judgment had been wrong once at the cost of a princess, an alliance, and 30 years. The Between Witch did not explain herself. She did not apologize. And now the enemy had walked out of this very court wearing the human's face, which meant, Cale said, turning to Lena with a courtesy worse than hatred, that even if her heart was true, her existence had already armed the enemy with a weapon no elf could have given him. I do not say she is false, he finished quietly. I say we cannot afford her even if she is true. Send her west, to the Sea Havens, guarded and honored and far from anything holy, and let the witch between the worlds learn that Canthalar is done gambling its children on her riddles. Around the circle, heads nodded. Too many heads. Then the hall heard the witnesses. Valus testified like he fought. Economically, without decoration, refusing to meet Lena's eyes the entire time as if eye contact might be mistaken for softness. He described a human who had stepped between an arrow-struck warden and death without being asked, who had been offered no reward and requested none, who had, he noted flatly, been alone and unguarded in the western forest with the prince of the realm and 11 bows, any of which she could have turned to the enemy's purpose with a scream at the wrong moment, and hadn't. I swore an oath 30 years ago, he told the 8, that I would put an arrow through the next chosen of SARETH before they crossed the tree line, and spare us all the second act. A pause, in which nobody breathed. I have watched her for a month, waiting for my reason. My lords, I am still waiting. That is my testimony. The healers of the Middle Terrace sent their eldest, who had wept at the moving of a stopped heart, and who described in a steady voice what the human had taught them, and finished by asking the 8 lords how many elves of Canthalar would need to be alive today by her hands before the houses considered the debt worth mentioning. The answer, entered into the record with elven precision, was currently 11, including 1 king. And then, because Canthalar was Canthalar, the doors opened for the last witness, and it was the boy from the fountain. His mother stood behind him, hands on his shoulders, terrified and unbending. He was perhaps 6. He had demanded to come. The petition, Lena learned later, had been dictated to a patient loremaster and was 4 sentences long, and the council had granted it because the law of the 9 houses said any citizen of the mountain could speak at a trial of exile, and no one had ever imagined the law meant this. The boy walked to the center of the white floor, stood beside Lena approximately as tall as her elbow, glared at the assembled majesty of the elven realm, and pounded his small fist over his heart, twice. She showed me my drum, he said. You can't send away the person who shows you your drum. It should have been nothing. It was a child's sentence in a hall of 600-year-old winters. But Lena watched it land on the 8 lords like weather. Watched Lady Nereveth's sea-glass eyes close briefly, as if against a light. And she understood something about long-lived peoples that no month of study had taught her. When children come rarely, a child's voice in a courtroom is not sentiment. It is scripture. The vote, even so, was going to fail. Doramir told her afterward that he'd counted it in the faces. 4 for exile, 3 against, Nereveth unreadable, and exile needed only a plain majority with the crown too weak to veto. Reason was going to win. Cale's good, kind, careful wall was going to close, stone by stone, around the last door of 2 worlds. Which is why the Prince of the Kant Peaks rose from his seat at his father's side, walked to the center of the white floor, and did the thing that no one, not the eight, not the king, not the human standing beside him, saw coming. I invoke the right of the offered road, Boromir said. The hall did not gasp. It went silent the way the forest had gone silent in the western clearing. The silence of people watching a legend stand up in the grass. The remembrancer, in her witness alcove, lifted her blind face with the first expression of pure surprise Lena had ever seen her wear. The right is real, Lady Nereveth said at last, slowly. It has been invoked 4 times in the memory of the stone. Prince Boromir. Do you understand what you are? I bind my road to hers. Boromir's voice was the command tone, the one he hated, and he spent it now like a man emptying his purse. Where she is sent, I go. What she is denied, I am denied. If she proves false, if the second chosen betrays the mountain as the first betrayed it, then my life and my name answer for it, before my father's throne, under the law of the 9. Exile her, and you exile the heir of Canthalar. Guard her, and my blood stands surety for her heart. He turned, not to the lords, to Lena, and the winter of his face was gone, burned off entirely, and what was underneath had been there, she realized, for longer than either of them had been willing to chart. She reached into the hour that does not negotiate, he said, and negotiated. I have watched her do it for a month, with wounds, with kings, with all of you. I am not gambling, my lords. I have never in my life been more certain of a road. Boromir! The king's voice, thin and terrible from the cedar chair. You are my last... And there he stopped. The whole hall heard the sentence he did not finish, and the grey-draped chair at his left heard it too, and Erling of the Kant Peaks closed his eyes, an old man on a besieged heart, holding his final piece above the board. When he opened them, he was looking at Lena. Healer, he said. You have heard what my son offers. His life against your heart. Before the vote is cast, does the second chosen of SARETH accept the burden of it? And every eye in the Hall of the 9 came to rest on a small human woman in borrowed clothes, 1.60 meters of stubbornness and steady hands, who had walked into an emergency bay at 2:58 in the morning a month and a world ago and never once since then been asked what she chose. Lena looked at Boromir. You absolute idiot, she thought, with a tenderness that frightened her more than Morvath did. You grafted yourself to the foreign branch. No, she said. The hall rocked. Boromir went white. Lena stepped forward, into the center of the eye, and finished the sentence the way she'd learned to finish hard sentences, all at once, before the anesthetic wore off. I won't accept his life as my collateral. I've spent 12 years keeping people alive. I'm not going to start mortgaging them. But I'll offer the council something better than his blood because I finally understand what you're all actually afraid of. You're not afraid I'm a traitor. You're afraid you can't tell. Rowan Voss looked true and rang false, and it cost you Lyriel, and you've spent 30 years learning that your eyes can be fooled. She lifted her hand and pointed, respectfully, precisely, the way she pointed at scans, at the witness alcove. But 3 nights ago we all learned something new. Her stone can't be fooled. It drinks presence. It found the hole in your court that 600 years of trust couldn't find. Lena turned in a slow circle, meeting the 8 pairs of ancient eyes one by one. So drink me. All of me. I'll sit with the remembrancer and open every memory I own, my world, my crossing, my month on your mountain, every conversation, every intention, all of it, on the record of the stone, for this council to walk through at will. No human has ever offered that, because no human could survive their secrets being public. I'm offering it because I've done the accounting, my lords, and it turns out the only thing I own on 2 worlds that's worth anything, her voice caught exactly once, and she let it because it was true, is that I have nothing to hide. Silence. The remembrancer's blind face was turned toward her like a sunflower.
It has never been done to a willing mind, the old elf said softly. The stone takes, it does not knock. A pause. It will hurt, child. So does everything useful, Lena said. Ask my patience. Lady Nereveth of the southern shores stood. She looked for a long moment at the naked chair of House Valinor, that same unreadable look, and then at Lena, and the sea-glass eyes had gone very bright. The House of the Southern Shores, she said, calls the vote. The vote of the 8 took the form Canthalar gave all its gravest things, light. Each lord held a sphere of the mountain's crystal, and each in turn set it on the white floor and let it answer, gold for trust, blue for exile, dark for abstention. Lena stood in the center and watched her life decided in colors. Kale of the High Passes set his down first, blue, steady, and he had the grace to meet her eyes while it burned. 2 of the western lords followed him, blue, and the wall was building. Then the eldest healer's house, gold. the house of the wardens, Valis's testimony still hanging in the air, gold. A long pause, and the keeper of the eastern marches, inheritor, as of 3 days ago, of Valinor's shattered watch, set down his sphere, and it kindled gold, and he said to the hall, simply, "We are blind in the east. I will not also put out the one lamp we were sent." 3 and 3. The seventh lord, old and cautious, set down dark, abstention, and a murmur crossed the hall like wind, because dark counted for no one, and the arithmetic now stood at a knife's edge. Lady Neraveth came last. She carried her sphere to the center of the floor, not to the circle's edge where the others lay, but to the center, to Lena's feet, close enough that Lena could see the old elf's hands, and the fine tremor in them, and the sea-glass eyes that had spent the whole session looking at an empty chair. "My daughter served House Valinor," Neraveth said quietly, to Lena alone, though the whole silence carried it to every ear. 600 years, my house trusted the East because I vouched for it. Whatever holes are found in the memory of this world, child, some of them will be found in mine, and I have never in my long life wanted so badly to be able to see. She set the sphere down. "You offered them your whole mind, knowing it would hurt. That is not what traitors offer. It is what healers offer. I know. I raised one." The sphere lit gold, and the Hall of the Nine breathed out 30 years. Doromir caught up with her in the moonlit colonnade outside, and for the first time since the clearing, the Prince of the Kant Peaks looked entirely lost for protocol. "You said no," he said, "in front of the 8, to the right of the offered road. Do you have the smallest idea what that right means? What it has meant, 4 times in the memory of the stone?" "I know exactly what it means. It means you put your life on a table because a room full of frightened old men couldn't read a chart." Lena stopped walking and turned, and the moons were doing that thing to his face again, and she was done pretending not to notice. "Doromir, in my whole life, no one has ever offered to go where I'm sent. People wave from the shore. You tried to board, so understand what I'm about to say, because I'll only be able to say it once tonight." She took a breath. "Thank you. And if you ever gamble your life on me again, I will sedate you myself. I know 11 ways, and you'd enjoy none of them." The laugh came out of him like something escaping after 30 years in a cell, startled, unguarded, entirely unroyal, and afterward, the silence between them had changed its chemistry, and both of them knew it, and neither of them moved, and the waterfalls braided silver down through the dark. "Lena," he said at last, quietly, and her name in his voice was its own event. "I know," she said. "Not yet. There's a stone tomorrow, and a war after that. But—" and she permitted herself, clinically, deliberately, the whole truth. File it under pending, prominently. They gave her that night to rest before the stone. She didn't rest, of course. She stood at her impossible window while the 2 moons climbed, replaying the hall. Doromir's face when she said no, and then his face when she'd finished, which was going to require a whole new chart. And she was still standing there when the mirror on the far wall stopped holding her reflection. It happened without drama, the way the worst things do. One moment, a tired woman in firelight. The next, dark storm curls, a fringe plastered in small commas, and eyes of glass looking out of the silver where Lena's face should have been. The burns were gone. The borrowed body was gone. What stood in the mirror wore itself now, an elf woman of terrible, patient beauty, translucent at the edges like the memory of a person, and her glass eyes held light, going 2 directions at once. "SARETH," Lena said. Her voice came out steadier than her hands. "Second chosen." The voice arrived without crossing the air, blooming directly inside her skull, the way the elven tongue had in the clearing. "You spend yourself well. I chose better than I knew." "You chose." A month of questions stampeded to the door at once. Lena, triaging by reflex, let the sharpest through. "The woman you were wearing. In my hospital. Is she alive?" The glass eyes did something that might, in a face less broken by 2 directions, have been warmth. Alive, home, and dreaming she was elsewhere. "I borrow gently, healer. I have been borrowed myself." The light in the mirror flickered. "Listen now. The stone tomorrow will hurt you and vindicate you. Endure it. That is not why I have spent a year of my strength on this hour. 3 things, second chosen, and the third will cost me. First, the king's wound is not a wound, it is a keyhole. The frost writing waits for a key that Morvath believes is coming to him, and it must never. The image guttered like a candle in a draught, steadied. Second, The first chosen breathes. Rowan Voss lives, and what he became is neither yours nor Morvath's guess, and the road east runs through what remains of him. When you find him, and you will, remember that homesickness is a wound, and you have never once in your life abandoned a wound. And the third? Lena whispered. The glass eyes flared, and for one heartbeat, the mirror stopped being a mirror and became a window, a hospital corridor, fluorescent, humming, a wall clock, a cold coffee standing on a nurse's station, still steaming faintly, still steaming, and Lena understood, with a vertigo that emptied her lungs, what she was being shown. The clock read 2:59. Your world holds its breath while you are here, SARETH said gently. The lake between the worlds does not flow, healer. It waits. Whatever you lose here, you lose truly. But nothing waits for you there except the minute you left. Grieve nothing yet. You have time to... The mirror went black. Not dark. Black. Black like the space between the stars, and out of it, faint and vast and horribly amused, in a voice like ash falling on snow. There you are, prophet. SARETH's light slammed back into the glass, flaring white, and her voice was no longer gentle. It was fast and fraying, a rope paying out over an edge. He is listening through your face. The face he wears is a window. Close it. Tell the remembrancer to close it. And healer, listen. The vote was not the danger. The stone is not the danger. One of the 8. The mirror shattered. Every shard hit the floor, reflecting a different thing. Firelight, moonlight, storm curls, ash. And then they were only glass, and the room was only a room, and Lena Marlowe stood alone in 2 worlds worth of silence, with the words, one of the 8, ringing where her heartbeat should have been. Section 6. They performed the rite at dawn, in the amphitheatre of the singers, because the lawmasters had calculated that no enclosed hall in Cantalar could hold what was about to be poured into the sky. Lena had expected a private ordeal, a small room, the remembrancer, perhaps the 8. Instead, she walked out at first light into a bowl of pale stone filled with the entire city. Tens of thousands of elves, terrace upon terrace, silent in the cold gold morning, the 8 lords in a crescent, the king in his cedar chair, wrapped to the throat, Doromir standing exactly where a step would take him to her side in under a second. She measured the distance despite herself, and knew he had too. The council had ruled that a mind offered to the record of the stone was offered to the mountain entire. If the second chosen was to be believed, she would be believed by everyone, all at once, forever. There would be no rumor after this. There would only be memory. The remembrancer met her at the center of the bowl, where a single chair of white cedar waited, twin to the king's. Last council, child, the old elf said quietly. The stone takes, it does not knock. It will not walk your halls in the order you built them. It goes where the weight is. Whatever you have buried deepest, that is where it digs first. All these thousands will stand inside your worst hour before they stand inside your best, the blind face tilted. No mind has ever offered this willingly, and I will tell you the true reason why, which is not privacy. It is that no one believes their worst hour will be understood. Do you? Lena looked up at the terraces, at Phelan and his 2 theatrically coughing colleagues, at Ithreni come down from the western passes, at Valis with his arms folded like a verdict pending, at a small boy on his mother's shoulders with his fist already resting over his heart, at the winter-eyed prince measuring 1 second of distance. A month ago, no, she said. Sit me down. The sphere rose from the remembrancer's hands and hung in the air above the amphitheatre like a small grey moon. Lena sat. The old elf's fingers came to rest, light as paper, on her temples. Breathe out, healer. She breathed out, and the stone took. Pain was the wrong word, she would decide later. Pain was local, and this was weather. It was the sensation of being read aloud, every page at once, by something patient and enormous. And then the sky over Cantalar stopped being sky. The mountains saw her world. They saw it the way the stone found it, by weight, and so it did not begin with wonders. But the wonders came. The stone, walking her halls, could not help crossing them, and Lena, pinned open in the white chair, felt 10,000 years of elves inhale as one people. They saw a city of glass towers from an airplane window at night, and did not understand at first that the ocean of gold beneath the clouds was lamplight, that humans, who lived 9 decades if they were lucky, had answered the darkness by drowning it. They saw a train pour itself through a mountain that had not been sung open, but bored, patiently, by machines and stubbornness. They saw the inside of an operating theatre, light without fire, blood given from the arm of a stranger in one city to the veins of a stranger in another. They saw a photograph of the earth itself, whole and blue and unbearably small, taken by men who had ridden fire beyond the sky, and the lore-masters of Canthalar, keepers of 10 millennia of song, gripped the terrace rails like sailors in weather, and threaded through all of it the thing the elves would speak of longest afterward, the thing no chronicle of earth would have thought to record, the crowds, billions of the short-lived, none of whom would see a second century, hurrying through their handful of decades, building, burying, teaching children to read in libraries, holding hands in waiting rooms, a species that lost everything it loved within a single elven youth and got up the next morning and built anyway. The stone did not editorialize. It only went where the weight was. But Lena felt the mountain understand something about her people that her people had never once thought remarkable, and begin, terrace by terrace, to grieve for and marvel at them in the same breath. If you have ever seen your own ordinary life through a stranger's eyes and found it suddenly unbearably precious, then you know what 10,000 elves did to a Tuesday. Then the stone found the corridor at 4 a.m. because that was where the wait was and the wonders ended. A hospital corridor at 4 a.m., fluorescent and humming, and a 23-year-old medical student running down it in her socks. The room at the end of the corridor, the white bed. Her father, they saw him as her memory kept him, bigger than the bed, bigger than the room, a carpenter's shoulders and laughing lines gone slack around the tubes, and her mother folded into the plastic chair, holding one of his hands, and Lena holding the other, 23 years old, 4 months into her clinical rotations, standing in the one building on Earth designed to help him and understanding, in real time, with the monitors doing what monitors do, that she did not yet know how. That the knowledge existed. It was in this building. It was in the heads of the people running past the door to other rooms. It was 17 minutes away with the specialist who had been paged. And that her father did not have 17 minutes. And she had 2 years of theory and a stethoscope she'd owned for 11 weeks. And all she could do with any of it was count, out loud, the failing rhythm of the first heartbeat she had ever loved. He squeezed her hand at the end. They saw that too. He couldn't speak by then, so he squeezed it in the old pattern from her childhood, the walking to school pattern, 3, and then 1, my girl. And the monitors went to their long single note, and the specialist arrived 9 minutes later, and was kind, and was too late. And somewhere in the 9 minutes between those two events, Lena Marlowe's entire future had been decided. The amphitheater made a sound. Lena, pinned open under the grey moon, heard it from very far away and could not name it. And then the stone showed the mountain what she built on the grave, and the sound changed. They watched 12 years assemble like a bridge built plank by plank over the gorge of those 9 minutes. The library carols at 3 a.m., the exams, the residency, the first save, the first loss, the 100th of each. They watched her learn the thing the elves' own healers had wept to be taught, the moving of a stopped heart from the outside. And they watched why. Because every chest her hands ever pressed was, somewhere underneath the clinical calm, a carpenter's chest, and every count was 3 and then 1, and the hour that does not negotiate had taken its pound of her once, at 23, and she had spent every year since making it negotiate with everyone else. They saw the cost because the stone went where the weight was and did not flatter. The empty apartment, the unread novels, the mother she called every Sunday and could not talk to about the only thing they shared, the cold coffees, the Tuesdays, a life closed like a wound, carefully, precisely, nothing left to chance, and nothing left either, the terraces understood now, of the girl who had believed in hidden doors. And then the stone came to 2:47 in the morning, 1 month and 1 world ago, and the whole mountain leaned in.
They lived it with her, at last, from the inside, the held breath quiet, the doors at 2:58, the woman on the gurney with the spiral burns. And here the memory did the thing that memories do and eyes do not. It kept everything, every detail her retinas had taken in while her attention was on vitals and airways, and it played all of it, at full weight, across the sky. The stone slowed. The remembrancer's fingers tightened at Lena's temples. Because there, in the remembered corridor, beyond the remembered chaos of the bay, visible for 19 seconds through the swinging doors, in the fluorescent hum, among the remembered nurses and the remembered gurneys, stood an orderly in remembered blue scrubs, man-shaped, motionless, watching the bay, and where his face should have been, where every other background stranger in 12 years of Lena's remembered corridors had a face, the memory held a hole. The amphitheater's sound died so completely that Lena could hear the waterfalls 3 terraces down. The stone, patient and enormous, did what the Remembrancer's stone had done 4 nights ago at a feast. It circled the absence, drank the shape of it, confirmed it from every angle her eyes had ever glanced across that corridor. A person-shaped nothing, in a hospital on Earth, at 2:58 in the morning, standing at parade rest, watching SARETH choose. They were already there. Lena heard her own thought echo strangely, doubled, and realized the stone was still open. The whole mountain was thinking it with her. They've been crossing for years. They were in my building. It watched her take me. That's how Morvath knew a healer was coming before I'd been here an hour. And then, because the stone went where the weight was, it did the cruelest, most necessary thing it had done all morning. It jumped 11 years and 1 weight further down. The corridor at 4 a.m. The white room at the end. Her father, the tubes, the plastic chair. The specialist arriving 9 minutes late. Kind and useless. The memory ran again. The worst hour, the buried hour, the hour 10,000 elves had already wept inside. But this time the stone was not showing them Lena's grief. It was showing them the corridor behind the arriving specialist. The far end. The fire door, propped, the hole stood in it. The same parade rest, 11 years earlier. Watching a medical student count her father's last rhythm. Lena came out of the stone screaming, and the scream was a question, and there was no one alive on 2 worlds who could answer it. They stopped the right there. There was nothing left to prove. The record already held more vindication than the 8 had asked and more horror than anyone had bargained for. And the Remembrancer, gray-faced, her old hands shaking for the first time in the memory of anyone living, gathered the sky back into the sphere and pronounced the seal on the testimony of the second chosen with a voice that never once steadied. What happened next in the amphitheater of the singers had no precedent in the protocol of the 9 houses, and so the city invented one. It began somewhere on the lower terraces, with a small boy on his mother's shoulders, and it spread upward tier by tier through tens of thousands. Fists over hearts, twice. Drums. Drums. Not a cheer. Canthalar did not cheer, and this was not joy. It was the salute the mountain had, until that morning, given only to its own returning soldiers. Lena, hollowed out in the white chair, wept without noise and let them watch. There was no point doing otherwise. They had already stood inside everything. It was Valus who reached her first, cutting across the bowl before the lords, before even Doramir, unfolding his arms for the first time in a month, and the captain who had sworn to put an arrow through her, looked down at the human he had watched for his reason and said in his flat, economical voice, the longest sentence she would ever hear him volunteer. My oath is resolved. Whatever roads you are given, healer, my bow rides on them, and I am done waiting for a reason to be wrong about you. But it was the Remembrancer who mattered most, and the Remembrancer came last, and what she brought was not comfort. Before her, though, came the king's word, carried down into the amphitheater by a herald while the terraces still drummed, because Erling of the Kant Peaks had watched the whole rite from his cedar chair, and had, apparently, stopped waiting for councils. The herald's voice rang across the bowl with the first royal proclamation of the new age, and Lena heard it through the hollowed-out ringing in her ears. Let the mountain witness. The testimony of the second chosen is sealed and beyond dispute. Let the 8 houses convene at the king's bedside at moonset tomorrow, not to weigh the human, for the stone has weighed her, but to weigh the road. The east is blind, the enemy musters, the wound between the worlds drinks, and the king of the Kant Peaks has spent 30 years being cautious and 1 month being wrong. We are done deciding whether to trust the healer. A pause, and even second-hand, even through a herald, Lena could hear the old winter voice sharpen on the final line. We convene to decide what we are prepared to trust her with. The drumming of the terraces doubled. Somewhere in it, Lena caught Doromir's eye across the bowl and saw her own thought arrive on his face in the same instant. The tear. After 30 years the question was finally, formally, on the table. And so, whispered the cold clinical voice that never slept in her, was every danger that came with it, and SARETH's severed warning ringing beneath it all like a cracked bell. One of the 8. Tomorrow at moonset, all 8 would stand within arm's reach of a dying king and the holiest object of the elven world. And one of them, if the prophet had finished her sentence the way Lena feared, would not be casting their sphere for the road at all. 2 holes, child, the old elf said quietly, beneath the drumming of the terraces. 11 years apart, in the halls of your world, both of them standing watch over your worst hours. The council will tell themselves it is SARETH they were tracking. Perhaps. But the stone does not lie about weight, and I will say to you what I will not yet say to the 8. The blind face came close. The night your father died, second chosen. The witch between the worlds had not yet chosen anyone. There was nothing in that corridor worth an enemy's sentry. Nothing except a girl deciding what she would become. So either the Torima waste sentries, or something decided I was worth watching, Lena whispered. 11 years before SARETH did. Close your window, the Remembrancer said. That at least we do tonight. And then, healer, we must speak of why. Doramir found her in the hour between, the right behind her, the closing ahead, on the balcony of her round room, wrapped in a blanket she didn't remember accepting, watching the afternoon light move on the peaks. He came out and stood beside her at the rail and for a long time said nothing at all, which she was learning was the most fluent thing he did. You saw all of it, she said finally. It wasn't a question. Everyone had seen all of it. That was going to take some living with. I saw all of it. The apartment, the Sundays I couldn't talk to her, the socks, a ragged breath that wanted to be a laugh. 10,000 elves watched me run down a corridor in my socks, Doramir. 10,000 elves, he said quietly. Watched a girl run toward the hour that does not negotiate, with nothing in her hands, because her father was in it. And then they watched her spend 12 years arming herself so she would never arrive empty-handed again. Lena. He turned and made her look at him, and his eyes had been recently and unashamedly wet. My people have a word for what the stone showed today. We say it of our oldest songs, the ones that survive when the harpers who made them are dust. Vethalar. It means, a grief that became a gate, sorrow that others walk through into somewhere better. Every healer you trained, every chest you kept counting for, the whole middle terrace breathing tonight. You built a gate out of 9 minutes, and you have been holding it open with your bare hands for 12 years, alone. He reached out and tucked a strand of blonde hair back with a gentleness that undid her more than the stone had. You are not alone holding it now. That is all I came to say. File it. And the winter face broke into the dawn on a mountain smile, underpending, prominently. She laughed, wet, wrecked, real, and let her forehead rest against his shoulder. 1 breath, 2, 3, and then 1, before the tower and the mirror and the war resumed their claims. It was not yet the thing it was becoming. But it was the first time in 11 years that Lena Marlowe had leaned her weight on anything, and the mountain, which now knew exactly what that cost her, kept its 10,000 opinions respectfully to itself. They closed it at moonrise, in the cell at the top of the Loremaster's tower. The window Morvath had cut by wearing her stolen face, the thread between the red crystal and her likeness. The working took the Remembrancer, 3 Loremasters, and every shard of the shattered mirror from Lena's chamber, reassembled on the round floor like a jagged silver map. Lena's part was simple and horrible, to stand at the center and let her face be seen, one last time, while the singers unmade the seeing. He will feel it close, the Remembrancer warned. There will be a moment, a breath at most, when the window looks both ways. Do not speak. Do not answer anything you hear. The shards lit. The thread pulled taut. And for 1 breath, exactly as promised, Lena Marlowe looked through her own stolen face into the country of ash. She saw a plain that had once been land, under a sky the color of extinguished fire. She saw the wound in the air, closer now, vaster than the memory of it, its edges no longer flickering weakly, feeding, fat with something, drinking a red glow that rose from the ground itself in threads, from thousands upon thousands of points of red arranged in ranks across the ash to the horizon, and each point of red was a crystal, and each crystal tipped a spear, and each spear stood at parade rest in a man-shaped grip of folded nothing. An army of holes, waiting with a patience of decades, in rows that did not end. And walking the front of those ranks, inspecting them the way a farmer inspects weather, broad-shouldered, dark-bearded, gray-uniformed, and unmistakably, cataclysmically human. The window slammed shut. The shards went dark. And in the ringing silence of the tower cell, it was not the Remembrancer's warning Lena broke, because she did not speak, and it was not Morvath's voice that had crossed in the closing breath. It was Rowan Voss's, quiet, homesick, 30 years older, and aimed at her like a hand reaching across ice. Tell Doramir. The bridge broke on both sides. Lena stood in the dark among the dead shards for a long time after the Loremasters had gone, holding the sentence the way she'd once held pressure on a wound, afraid of what would happen when she let go. 6 words, a message, a confession, a trap, a plea. Her clinical mind laid out the differentials and could eliminate none of them. Only one thing was certain, and it was the thing that would keep her staring at the ceiling of her round room until the second moon set. The first chosen had known she was at the window. He had been waiting for her there.
Section 7. She told Doramir at dawn on the archery terrace because some sentences should only be handed over in open air. He was mid-draw when she said it. The bridge broke on both sides, and she watched the arrow sink slowly, slowly, until the bow hung forgotten at the end of his arm, and the Prince of the Cant Peaks stood looking east at nothing with the face of a 9-year-old hearing hooves return without his sister. Say it again, he said quietly. Exactly, every word. Tell Doramir, the bridge broke on both sides, that's all of it. Then the window shut. She gave him what she'd given the Loremasters, the full clinical account, the voice quiet, homesick, unhurried, no threat in it, aimed and waiting for her. Doramir, I've delivered a lot of hard messages. I need you to tell me what this one is, because I've run the differentials all night and I can't close a single one." He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, it was to the eastern peaks. "When I was a boy, Rowan taught me to shoot on this terrace. He had a rule. He called it the soldier's rule, from his war, in your world." The bow turned slowly in his hands. "The first story you hear about a disaster is drawn by the survivor's hand. He made me repeat it every morning. I thought it was about shooting." A breath. "The Remembrancer's stone showed us the bridge from the memories of the 10 who came home, Lena. 10 survivors, riding hard out of a black pass, in grief and shame and torchlight. We have replayed their remembering for 30 years and called it history, but the stone drinks presence, not truth. It holds what they saw, and they saw the far side of a gorge, at night, in falling snow." He turned, and his eyes were terrible. "No one alive ever saw the near side. No one ever asked who held the western end of that bridge while my sister walked out onto it. It never once occurred to us to ask. He pushed her, or he failed to reach. Those were the only 2 stories, because those were the only 2 stories the survivors could see from where they stood. And Rowan saying there's a third." Lena's skin crawled with the elegance of it. "That the bridge didn't fail, that it was cut, from the western side, by someone who rode home with the 10, or ahead of them, or behind." Doromir's knuckles were white on the bow. 30 years, Lena. 30 years my father has worn the tear like a penance, and I have hunted the eastern passes for a traitor, and the message that comes across 2 worlds to find me says, you were hunting in the wrong direction. The betrayal of the first chosen began at home. He looked at her and said the thing they had both been circling since a mirror shattered in her room. One of the 8. Sarathiel wasn't warning us about a second Maethor. She was telling us the first wound never closed. The same hand, Lena, 30 years, still at the table. If you have ever watched someone's history rewrite itself in front of them, every grief refiled, every certainty resubmitted as evidence, then you know why Lena said nothing at all and simply stood beside him while the sun came up on a different past. They tested the 8 that same day, because after Maethor, the 8 demanded it themselves. It was done with full ceremony in the Hall of the 9, the Remembrancer's sphere drinking the assembly, while the whole council stood witness to itself, and Lena watched the memory play back with her heart in her throat. 8 lords, 8 presences, 8 faces the stone held clear and whole and there. No holes, no man-shaped absences politely holding wine. Lord Kael wept openly when his own image steadied in the air, 600 years old, and shaking with relief at the proof of his own existence. And for a moment, the hall was almost warm, almost healed. Lena stood in the gallery beside the Remembrancer and felt no relief at all. "You see it," the old elf murmured, blind face forward, voice pitched for 2. "The test proves they're present," Lena said quietly. "It proves they're real. It was the right test for Maethor, because Maethor was a costume with nothing inside it." She watched the 8 congratulate each other below, watched 30 years of suspicion visibly lifting off the council like weather, and felt it settle, all of it, onto her own shoulders. It can't see the other thing, the worst thing. A real elf, truly present, truly themselves, 600 years of verified memory, who at some point, for some reason, said yes. She closed her eyes. "There's no stone for that. In my world, we've been looking for one for 10,000 years. So the mountain celebrates," the Remembrancer said, "and the hunt passes to you. To the only pair of eyes in Canthalar that reads bodies the way my stone reads presence." The blind face tilted toward her, and the old voice was very gentle and utterly without mercy. "Watch them, healer. At moonset, at the king's bedside, all 8 will stand in one room with everything the enemy has ever wanted. Watch them the way you watched a throat by candlelight. It is a terrible thing I am asking. It is also the only instrument we have." The king sent for her an hour before moonset. Alone, no herald, no lords. A summons carried by Phelan with wide eyes and no explanation. She found Erling propped in the great bed with the windows open to the cold, because he had ordered them open, because, he informed her before she could object, a man who is being eaten by frost from the inside gains nothing by dying warm. She checked the writing's advance anyway, counted the fighting heart anyway, and he endured her hands with the long-suffering expression that had become, over the weeks of his siege, the closest thing they had to a private joke. "Sit, healer, not the counselor's chair, the near one." She sat. For a while, The king of the Kant peaks watched the moons climb over his mountains, and Lena, who knew this particular silence from 100 bedsides, waited. It was the silence of a patient deciding to say the true thing. I have been a king for 400 years, Erling said at last, and a father for 90, and I was better at the first, and both of my children knew it. His hand found the tear on its chain, an old man's slow gesture. Lyriel would have liked you. That is not sentiment, it is assessment. She collected exactly your kind, the stubborn, the useful, the ones who talk back to thrones. Rowan was one of her collection long before he was my son. The winter eyes came around. You carry his message for Doramir. I know of it. I know also that you have all wondered, carefully, out of my hearing, whether the dying king should be told that his first son lives, and his daughter's death may have grown from a seed inside his own counsel, a thin, sharp breath. I am dying, healer, not diminishing. Tonight I will set the tears road in front of the 8, and I will watch them receive it, and you will watch them receive it, and between your eyes and mine we will learn more in 1 hour than 30 years of hunting the wrong direction has taught this mountain. I did not summon you for medicine. For one moment, the whole fortress of him stood open. I summoned you because in 90 years of fatherhood I never once asked for help, and I am told by 10,000 witnesses of a grey stone that you are the person one asks. So, help me, Lena Marlowe. Help me spend my death as well as you have spent my last season. And when it is done, when the mountain sings and my son carries the tear onto your road, tell him the thing I will not manage to. The old voice did not crack. It simply, briefly, stopped being a king's. Tell him he was never second. He was only later. There is a difference, and I saw it too late to say so. Lena took the ancient hand between both of hers and gave the only oath she had ever kept. Tell him yourself, she said. I'll buy you the time. It's what I'm for. The king's chamber at moonset held 11 people, 1 crystal, and 30 years of consequence. Erling sat propped in the great bed, like winter refusing to melt, the tear pulsing slow against his breastbone, the frost writing a fine dark filigree above the neck of his robe now. Climbing, Lena's eye measured automatically, 2 finger widths since the amphitheatre. The 8 lords stood in their crescent. Doramir stood at his father's right. Lena had been placed, at the king's own instruction, at his left, in front of the grey-draped chair's ghost, in the councillor's position, and she felt the 8 register the placement like a moved piece on a board. She watched them register it. She watched everything now. The remembrance's assignment had rewired the room, where yesterday she'd have seen 8 ancient statesmen. Tonight she saw 8 patients presenting, and she read them ceaselessly, one by one. Kale, still scoured raw by his own relief. The Western lords, hands quiet, pulses steady in their throats. The keeper of the Eastern marches, exhausted, grief-thin from digging through 30 years of forged watchlogs. The old abstainer, unreadable as ever, but unreadable the way stones are, not the way doors are. And Lady Neriveth of the southern shores, sea-glass eyes attentive, spine straight, one hand resting, as it always rested, Lena realized, as it had rested through the trial, through the vote, through every session Lena had ever watched her sit, over a small silver locket at her throat, not touching it, covering it. My lords. The king's voice was thinner tonight, and no one in the room pretended otherwise. The stone has weighed the healer. The east is blind, the enemy musters in ranks that were seen through the closing window, and the first chosen walks among them, alive, a ripple. That news had gone to the 8 only hours before, and it had not settled. The wound between the worlds drinks. And so we come at last to the question I have refused for 30 years, and I will put it plainly, because I no longer have the breath for courtcraft. His hand rose, trembling, and closed around the tear of the first tree. The 5 holy things must go to the river, or both worlds end slowly instead of quickly. The healer must carry them, or no one carries them. On this the prophet, the stone, and my own dying judgment finally agree, which leaves only the peace that I hold. So counsel me, my lords, and counsel me tonight. Does the tear of the first tree leave the mountain? Silence. Then, one by one, around the crescent, the 8 gave their answers, and Lena read every syllable of every body while they did. Kale, horse, the tear must go. He had opposed the healer with everything and been wrong, and he would not be wrong twice. The Western lords, cautious. The tear must go, but with the whole strength of the mountain around it. The Eastern keeper, The tear must go soon, before the blind East opened its eyes first. The old abstainer abstained, and even his abstention read true. An ancient elf, genuinely, deeply unsure, and Lena crossed him off a list she hated keeping. Lady Nereveth spoke last, as she always spoke last. The tear must go, she said, in her level, sea-worn voice, and it must go quietly. No host, no banners, no strength of the mountain announcing its road to every hole in the east. A small company, moving fast, unlooked for. That is the council of the southern shores. A pause, and her hand settled a fraction more firmly over the locket. The enemy has waited 30 years, my king. He expects armies. Send him a whisper instead. And it was excellent counsel. Very possibly the correct counsel. That was the true horror of the Remembrancer's assignment. The same 9 words fit a loyal strategist and a shepherd guiding a lamb down a quiet road where something waited, and no instrument on 2 worlds could tell her which she had just heard. The king closed his eyes. The frost writing at his throat seemed, in the candlelight, very black. Then hear the will of the crown, Erling said. The tear does not move while I breathe. The old formula, and the room began its bow, and then the winter voice cut through its own law like a blade through ice. And my healer informs me, with the honesty I once mistook for insolence, that I will not breathe past the turning of the season. Therefore, his eyes opened and found his son. At my death, the tear passes to the heir of Canthalar, as it has passed for 10,000 years. And the heir of Canthalar has bound his road to the second chosen, before the law of the 9, of his own free will, a binding I called folly, and now call the last wise thing done in this mountain. Something that was almost a smile crossed the dying winter of his face. I refuse you nothing, healer. I merely require you to wait for it. My son will bring the tear to your road the day the mountain sings my ending. And until that day, you will both remain in Canthalar, and you will spend my last season learning everything the lawmasters, the war captains, and one old dying king can teach you about the world you are going to save. That is the will of the crown. Let the 8 witness it. The 8 witnessed it. And Lena, watching the crescent through the formal murmur, saw 7 bodies do what bodies do when history resolves. Release, settle, exhale. And she saw Lady Nereveth's hand, for 1/2 second, clench, locket, chain, and all, before the sea-glass composure closed over it, like water over a stone. She followed her 20 minutes later. It was not a decision. It was triage. Nereveth had slipped from the chamber during the witnessing formalities, alone, unescorted, and every alarm Lena's body owned had gone off at once, and she had learned in 2 worlds to obey that particular bell. She tracked the Lady of the Southern Shores down the moonlit colonnade, past the sleeping fountains, to a reading alcove in the lawmaster's wing, and stopped outside its arch, in shadow, because from inside came a sound that redrew everything. Weeping, old, practiced, nearly silent weeping. The weeping of someone who has done it for years and learned to spend it quietly, like a debt paid in small coins. And then Nereveth's voice, wrecked and low, speaking to something that made no sound in return. They are sending it east, little one. Do you hear me? It is finally leaving the mountain, exactly as he wanted, and they think it is their own idea, and I stood in that room and said my 9 words and watched the king's face, and I cannot anymore. 30 years you have been his, and I have been his because you are, and tonight I looked at that human child and her whole opened life, and I thought she showed them everything, and it saved her. Lena stepped into the arch. Nereveth did not startle. That was the detail Lena would remember. The old elf simply raised her sea-glass eyes, wet and ancient and unsurprised, from the thing in her hands. The silver locket, open at last, and inside it, no portrait. A single dried leaf, gold-veined, Silvarin gold, and wound around it, a fine braid of dark hair. I wondered which of us would break first, Lady Nereveth said quietly. I hoped it would be me. Come in, healer, and close the arch. So Lena closed the arch and sat, and the Lady of the Southern Shores told it at last, in the level voice of a confession rehearsed nightly for 30 years, and never once permitted out. Her name is Merlin, my only child. You understand what that weighs now, among my people. She rode east with the 12, in Lyriel's own company. She was my house's pride in that quest, and I let her go proudly. The locket turned and turned in the old hands. What the 10 survivors never knew, what no remembering holds, because no living eye saw it, is that I followed. 3 days behind, alone, with supplies and a mother's foolishness, meaning only to see her one more time before the long east took her. I reached the high pass in the storm, in the dark, on the 9th night. The sea glass eyes had gone somewhere far away and frozen. I saw the camp asleep. I saw Rowan Voss rise and walk to the cliff, and I saw the black shape unfold out of the air to meet him. And I was one small elf in the snow with a belt knife, so I did the only thing a spy can do. I hid, and I watched, and I memorized. And then the black shape turned its hood, not toward Rowan, toward the rocks where I lay. It had known I was there the whole time. It had waited for me to arrive, healer. I was not a witness. I was an appointment. The candle guttered. Neriveth's hand stilled on the locket. He showed me Merlin in the red crystal, taken that same hour, from the camp's edge, from her watchpost, without a sound, alive, screaming into the silence of that stone, and he let me hear it. And then Morvath of the Terima made me the bargain he had crossed a frozen country to make, because the first chosen was already refusing him, you see. Rowan was refusing. That is the truth 30 years of history never held. Whatever homesickness Morvath offered him on that cliff, Rowan Voss looked at it and turned away and started back toward the camp to raise the alarm. The enemy's grand corruption had failed. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. And so the enemy turned to the mother in the rocks and offered a simpler trade. The bridge, or the daughter, one rope cut in the dark, the western anchor, where no eye would ever look, timed to the crystal's flare. He did not tell me who would be standing on it. I have told myself that for 30 years. It is even true. It has never once helped. Lyriel, Lena whispered. The princess walked out to call Rowan home because she trusted him last and longest, and she was right to. She was right, healer. That is the grave under all the graves. And my knife had already crossed the rope, and the crystal flared, and the ice did what cut ice does. The old elf's spine stayed straight through all of it. Only the tears moved, quiet and economical, spent like small coins. Rowan saw the anchor's end in the ice afterward. He knelt at that edge and understood in one look what the 10 survivors never did. Cut, not broken, betrayed from the west. The bridge broke on both sides. He has been carrying the true story east for 30 years, and I have been carrying it south, and tonight it finally came home. Everything after, you know. He walked into the ash because the ash held the only door back to his world and the only proof of what really happened. My daughter's scream lives in a spear-tip crystal, and I have spent 30 years as the Southern Shore's beloved lady, casting wise votes, giving sound counsel, his counsel, whenever the red light burns in my shard at moonset, and growing old around a hole shaped exactly like a girl. She looked up and delivered the rest, the quiet road, the whisper, the lock waiting in the east, and the arch of the little alcove seemed to close around Lena like a hand. And then you must run very fast, because the counsel I gave tonight was his, every word. And child, you must understand before it takes another step. Morvath is not trying to stop your quest. The locket closed with a click like a key turning. He built it. He has been building it for 30 years. The 5 things, the river, the prophet's chosen healer. You are not walking a road to close the portal, Lena Marlowe. Her voice dropped to the whisper of a woman who had carried the sentence alone for 3 decades. You are the key, and every step east carries you closer to his lock. Section 8. They went to the king that same night because some confessions cannot survive until morning. Lena had expected resistance, flight, bargaining, the collapse of a person 30 years in the holding. Instead, Lady Neriveth rose from the alcove bench the moment Lena said he deserves to hear it from you, smoothed her robes with 2 steady hands, and walked to her own judgment like a woman finally released from a longer sentence. The only thing she asked for, in the moonlit colonnade, was strange and small, and would break Lena's heart at odd hours for years. When it is done, whatever is done, will you sit with me sometimes and speak of your world's hospitals, the places where the dying are not alone at night? A pause. I have been dying alone at night for 30 years. I should like to know how it is properly staffed. Doramir met them at the king's door, because Lena had sent Phelan running ahead with 4 words, "Bring the prince, quietly." And so it was 5 people in the end, in the cold, open-windowed chamber, a dying king, his last child, a healer from another world, an old blind keeper of memory summoned from her tower, and the lady of the southern shores, who crossed the floor and knelt at the foot of the great bed, and laid the silver locket on the coverlet like a soldier surrendering a blade, and told all of it again. The bridge, the knife, the scream in the crystal, 30 years of moonset counsel. Lena watched the room the whole time because that was her instrument and her post. She watched Doromir take the truth about his sister standing, white and absolutely still, one hand finding the bedpost midway through and gripping it as if the room had rolled like a ship. She watched the remembrancer's blind face turn slowly toward Nereveth and stay there, unreadable, drinking presence. And she watched Erling, watched her patient receive, in 1 hour, the answers to the 3 questions that had frozen him for 3 decades. Who, how, and the one that had done the real damage, why did my son leave us? The frost writing sat black at his throat. His face, above it, went through grief the way high country goes through weather, visibly, enormously, and without once losing its shape. When it was finished, the silence lasted a long time, and it belonged to the king, and no one touched it. 30 years, Erling said at last. I believed my judgment of Rowan Voss was the great failure of my reign. I gave a stranger my trust, my heir's chair, my people's holiest thing, and when it all burned, I built my death around the lesson. Trust was the error. His eyes, winter pale, moved from the locket to the kneeling lady. And now, at the end of everything, you kneel there and hand me the truth. My trust was never once betrayed, not by him. He refused the enemy on that cliff, alone, with a road home in the ashes, if he only said yes. And my daughter walked out on that bridge because her trust was never wrong either. The 2 people this mountain has spent 30 years condemning were the 2 most faithful souls on it. A sound escaped him that was not quite a laugh and had blood at the edges. The error was never trust, lady. The error was believing the enemy fought soldiers. He does not. He has never once needed to corrupt our children, only our love for them, yours for Merlin, Rowan's for a world of cold coffee and Tuesdays, and now mine. The pale eyes crossed the room, brief as a blade's flash, to Doromir and back, which he is counting on with such confidence that he has built a 30-year road out of it. You and I, Nereveth, are the 2 oldest fools on this mountain. Rise. Fools should not kneel to fools. My king, Nereveth said, not rising. I cut the rope. Yes, Erling said. And I dressed a keyhole in a crown and called it caution. And SARETH had to reach into another universe to find one honest pair of hands. We have all served him, lady, in our ways. The question that matters is only this. Are you done? Father. Doromir's voice came out of the stillness by the bedpost, and it was not the command tone, and it was not the prince's court voice. It was something younger and skinned. She cut the rope. Lyriel walked out onto that bridge, trusting the world her council had built for her. And one of the builders had already sold the anchor. I have stood in this room and heard mercy argued for 30 years coercion, and my head follows every step of it, and I will obey whatever the crown decides. But before it decides, he crossed the floor and knelt, suddenly, directly in front of Nereveth, eye to sea glass eye, close as a blade, and the whole room held its breath. I require one answer, lady, and I will know if it is false, because I have spent a month learning to read bodies from the finest instrument on 2 worlds. In 30 years of moonsets, did you ever once tell him anything that touched my sister's memory? Her grave song, her remembering days, the white flowers my father plants. Did he ever ask, and did you ever answer? The old elf did not flinch and did not look away. He asked, she said, twice. He collects grief the way lawmasters collect songs. It is currency where he trades, and twice, Prince, I gave him a bland lie and paid for it afterward in my daughter's screaming, because there was one commerce I would not enter even at that price. Her voice stayed level, only the locket hand whitened. You may weigh everything else I have done and find it wanting, but your sister's memory was never once on my table. It was the only room in my treason I kept swept. Doromir knelt there a long moment, reading her the way Lena had taught the healing halls to read a pulse. Patient, thorough, refusing the easy number. Then he rose and turned to the bed and said, in a voice scraped down to the wood, she is telling the truth, and I find a breath. I find that it matters more than it should. Proceed, father. I withdraw nothing and I object to nothing, but I will need to hate someone for this, and I intend to spend all of it, every year of it, on the Ash country. Let her live long enough to help me deliver it. So ordered. said the king, dry as winter, and something in the room, very quietly, set itself down. And the dying king of the Kant Peaks delivered the strangest sentence in the 10,000-year memory of the stone, witnessed by 4, recorded by 1, and spoken in the flat tone of a man who had finally stopped playing the board in front of him. Then the judgment of the crown is this: publicly, nothing, no arrest, no trial, no whisper. The Lady of the Southern Shores remains the Lady of the Southern Shores, wise in counsel and beloved of her house, because the moment Morvath doubts his oldest instrument, we are blind again, and he plays a new piece we cannot see. Privately, everything. At moonset, when the red light burns, you will kneel to your shard, as you have knelt for 30 years, and every word you pass him from this night on will be ours. He built a window into my council, lady. Winter smiled, thin and terrible, from the pillows. Congratulations, you are now a window into his. The war council that followed, the same 5, the windows shut at last. Phelan posted at the door with instructions to admit no one below the rank of catastrophe, was the longest night of Lena's second life, and it turned, all of it, around 6 words. You are the key. His lock. Then she does not go. Doromir said it first, flat and immediate, the bedpost still in his grip. If the road east is his design, if 30 years of this has been scaffolding built to deliver her to Ashvale, then we burn the scaffold. She stays on the mountain. We find another hand to carry the 5. There is no other hand, the remembrancer said quietly. The prophet reached across a universe past 10,000 elves to close hers around this one. Whatever a key is in the enemy's grammar, child, it is not a courier. It cannot be reassigned. Then no one goes. The tear stays. The relics stay scattered. Scattered is safe. 5 sullen lands are 5 locked doors. And the portal drinks, Lena said. It was the first thing she'd said in an hour. The room turned. She had been doing what she did, listening, reading, charting, and somewhere in the long arguments the shape of it had finally come clear to her, the way a diagnosis comes, all at once, ugly and load-bearing. That's the trap inside the trap, Doromir. Look at the board the way he built it. If I go east, I walk toward his lock. If I stay, the wound between the worlds keeps feeding, slower, patient, decades, and both worlds die anyway, just politely. He wins the fast game or he wins the slow game. That's not a trap you can refuse. That's a prognosis. She stood, because she thought better on her feet at bedsides, and paced the old king's floor. So we do what you do with a terminal chart. You stop asking whether and start asking how. He's spent 30 years designing the version of this quest he wants. The quiet road, the small company, the whisper, his words, in her mouth, at his moonsets. Fine. Then the one thing on 2 worlds we know for certain is that we never, ever give him that quest. She turned to face them. We give him a different one. Wrong roads, wrong order, wrong company, wrong everything. And his own window tells him, every moonset, that his design is running exactly to plan. He built the maze, so we can't refuse to walk. But nobody said we have to walk it forwards. Silence. Then Valis, summoned at midnight, briefed in the corridor, and now leaning against the wall with his arms folded, spoke his flat soldier's assessment to the ceiling. 30 years I have served this council. That is the first plan I have ever heard in this room that Morvath did not write. A beat. I am with the healer. There remains the question under all of it, the remembrancer said, and her blind face turned toward Lena with the weight of the whole night behind it. The enemy needs a key and has arranged a universe to fetch one. But SARETH chose what she chose, not a soldier, though your world is full of them, not a thief, not a king. Twice now, the stone showed us. Rowan Voss carried a medic's satchel through his whole war. Twice, the prophet has reached across the dark, and both times her hand closed on a healer. The enemy believes that is his design. The old voice dropped. I have begun to wonder, children, if it is hers. A key turns a lock, but a healer, given a wound. She let it hang, unfinished, in the cold room, and no one dared finish it, and it would hang there. Lena felt it, across all the roads and all the books of blood to come. A healer, given a wound, does not open it. The season Erling had commanded became, in the weeks that followed, the strangest curriculum of Lena's much-examined life. Mornings with the lore masters, the deep maps, the true histories, the tongues of dwarf and orc, and the hand signs of the silent giants. Afternoons with Valis and the war captains, learning the 11 ways, and then grudgingly teaching them the 12th. Evenings at the king's bedside, medicine first, Then the real lessons, the ones no loremaster held, which dwarf lords could be trusted drunk and which only sober, what the orcs meant when they gave salt, why one never, ever admired a giant's olive tree aloud. Some of it she would carry east like armor. The dwarves of Frost Hollow, Erling taught her, despised thanks and honored debts. Never say thank you under the ice, daughter. Say, this will be repaid, and mean it, and they will follow you into fire. The orcs of the Red Canyons had 100 insults and one unforgivable one, which was pity, and the Tarian, here the old king's voice always slowed. The Tarian had not spoken aloud in 1,000 years, not because they could not, but because they had concluded, after their last war, that most of the world's evil traveled by mouth, and they were waiting, patiently, politely, for everyone else to reach the same conclusion. Their hand signs had no word for enemy. The lawmasters found this quaint. Lena, who had watched a gracious lord sit unblinking at a king's table, found it the most sophisticated threat assessment she'd ever encountered. A whole people who had simply declined to keep the concept where intruders could reach it. And some of the season was not curriculum at all. It was the boy from the fountain, Terranil. She knew his name now. Everyone in the healing halls knew his name now. Appointed by unanimous consent of the children of the lower terraces as her apprentice, marching beside her on rounds with a bandage roll held like a scepter, learning the recovery position on a long-suffering Phelan, while half the guard watched and coughed to hide what was happening to their faces. It was Ithreni, down from the passes monthly, trading compounds across a workbench until dawn. It was the mountain's strange growing gravity, the way the round room, the blue fire, the braided falls, the three and then one of it all, had stopped being where she was and become, by increments too small to chart, what she was part of. If you have ever caught yourself memorizing a place while you are still standing in it, that is not sentiment. That is your heart doing triage. It knows something is coming for the thing you love, and it is packing what can be carried. Erling taught her the world the way dying professors teach, everything at once, urgently, joyfully, emptying the shelves. And Lena took it the way she'd taken medical school, and somewhere in those weeks, the last of the formality between them wore through, and she started calling him old man when his stubbornness endangered his rest, and he started calling her daughter of the other shore, and neither of them ever once remarked on it. And there was Doromir. They had stopped pretending the file was pending. It had been promoted by unspoken and mutual paperwork to active. It lived in the way he appeared at the healing halls with 2 cups at the hour her teaching ended. In the way she'd learned the sound of his step on the terrace and stopped turning, because you don't turn for a sound that belongs there. It lived, one evening, in the king's winter garden, in the moment his hand came up to her face and her whole triage-trained, loss-armored, 12 years closed heart held perfectly still and let it. And Phelan came sprinting through the frost-killed roses, shouting that the moonset was upon them, and the Lady Nereveth was asking for the healer now, and Doromir rested his forehead against hers for exactly 1 breath, 3 and then 1, and said, in a voice wrecked between laughter and murder, "Your world has a word, I believe. Pending." The transmissions were staged in Nereveth's own shorehouse on the southern terrace, because 30 years of pattern could not risk a changed room. The first 2 had been rehearsals in all but name, routine reports, seeded with nothing, run purely so the council could learn the enemy's rhythms through the listening veil. Even so, they had taught Lena things no loremaster could. She learned that Morvath never asked a question he did not already half know the answer to. The questions were instruments, calibrated to measure the drift of his tool. She learned that he inquired, every moonset without fail, in the same mild collector's tone, after 3 subjects: the king's health, the healer's mood, not her plans, her mood, and whether the white flowers in the winter garden had bloomed. The last one had taken the council 2 days to decode, until the remembrancer, Blind-Face Grey, had supplied it. The white flowers were planted for Lyriel. He was tracking the household's grief calendar, currency, where he trades. Lena had watched 2 of them now from the concealment of the lawmaster's listening veil, and they never got easier. The old lady kneeling alone at a table before a shard of red crystal the size of a thumb, the light waking in it like a small cruel dawn, and the voice arriving out of it, ash on snow, gracious, unhurried, while somewhere behind the veil, Doromir's hand found Lena's in the dark and gripped. Tonight was the 3rd and the most dangerous, because tonight carried the first great lie, the false shape of the quest, weeks in the crafting, every detail argued over the king's coverlet. A grand embassy, the lie said. Banners and heralds, a slow diplomatic progress to the dwarf holds first, departing after the king's death with the whole pomp of the mountain, the exact opposite of the whisper Morvath had ordered, dressed as the council's foolish overruling of Nereveth's wise counsel. Let him rage at elven vanity, let him re-aim his 30-year design at a parade that would never march. Nereveth delivered it flawlessly. Lena, reading the old spy's body through the veil, could find no seam in it. The weariness true, the frustration true, the report pitched in the same dry cadence as 30 years of true reports. The red light listened. When it finally spoke, the voice was mild. Vanity was always the mountain's weather. No matter. A parade moves slowly. My patience moves not at all. You have done well, lady. A pause, the length of a held breath behind a veil. One thing more, and then rest. A correction to your calendar. You counsel them around a king who intends to die at the season's turn. How like Erling, scheduling even that. Tell no one, but arrange your house accordingly. The mountain will sing sooner than the healer thinks. The cold in the room changed. Lena felt Doromir stop breathing. My needle has been patient in that proud old heart for a long while now, and tonight it has found what it was sent to find. When the frost blooms, lady, do not grieve. Watch the tear. I want it moving, and I want the healer to carry it gladly, with all her reasons intact. See to her happiness. It matters to me. The light began to sink, gracious to the last. They are precious when they come willingly. The last one taught me that. The shard went dark, and in the same instant, across the sleeping terraces, from the high royal spire, every horn in Canthalar began to sound at once, and beneath them, vast and low, and singing up through the stone of the whole mountain, came a voice Lena had never heard before, and knew, instantly, cell deep, was the mountain itself. Nereveth rose from the table, grey as ash. The frost is blooming, she said. He is not going to let the king choose even his own death. Run, healer. Lena was already running, out through the shorehouse arch with Doromir astride behind her, up through terraces filling with light and fear, the mountain's vast low singing rising under her feet like the world's own monitors going to alarm, and her mind sprinting ahead of her body the way it always did in the hour that does not negotiate, held only two things. The count she would need at that bedside, 3 and then 1. And the last gracious words of the voice like ash, turning over and over with every step, revealing new teeth each time. I want the healer to carry it gladly. See to her happiness. They are precious when they come willingly. The last one taught me that. Section 9. The hour that does not negotiate had come for the king of the Kant Peaks, and it had brought reinforcements. Lena heard the room before she reached it, the particular pitch of controlled panic she knew from 100 corridors. And then she was through the door and into the cold chamber, and her whole world narrowed to the bed. Erling lay rigid against the pillows, breath coming in short paid installments, and the frost writing was no longer filigree. It had bloomed. Black branching lines climbed his throat and jaw, like winter taking a window, visibly moving, a finger width with every labored minute, and the tear of the first tree pulsed against his chest, faster now, brighter. And Lena registered the wrongness of that, even at a dead run. The crystal's slow, patient breathing had synchronized to the dying man's racing heart. Everyone who is not working, out. The trauma bay voice, and the room obeyed it, lords and attendants receding, leaving the working few. Ithreni, summoned by beacon and already elbow-deep in the satchels, the eldest healer of the middle terrace, the remembrancer, blind face bent close over the black branching lines, reading presence. Doromir at the bedpost, white and still, exactly where a step would take him to his father's side in under a second. Lena's hands found the old king, pulse, breath, the crawling frost, and began, as she had promised him, to buy time. It cost the way the worst hours cost. Ithren's glowing vial slowed the bloom. The mountain's own singing, channeled through the remembrancer's low countersong, held the lines at the collarbone for 1 hour, then a second. Lena worked the failing body's levers with everything 2 worlds had taught her. Fluids and pressure and positioning, the herb law of the passes. The count kept aloud at the throat because the counting steadied the room and the room steadied the patient. And twice in the 3rd hour, the old heart stumbled, and twice her hands moved it from the outside. 3 and then 1. 3 and then 1, while 100 singers on the great stair below held one sustained note like a rope thrown across dark water. The frost paid out its patience against theirs. Somewhere past the third hour, Erling's eyes opened, clear, present, entirely himself, and found her above him. Daughter of the other shore, a paper whisper. How long can you give me? If it holds at the collarbone, hours, maybe the night. She did not soften it. They had never once traded in softened numbers, and he would have fired her for starting now. If it crosses the collarbone, old man, it reaches the heart before dawn, and no vial on the mountain buys the next hour after that. Hours. Winter smiled up at her, thin as the last ice of spring. I have governed 4 centuries with less. Very well, healer, spend them for me, first. The pale eyes moved past her. Clear the room of everyone you are not, and bring me my son. But the remembrancer's blind face had come up from the black lines, and the old voice cut across the chamber like a dropped bell. Not yet, king, healer, forgive me, look. Her paper fingers hovered over the frost at the collarbone, tracing without touching. I have been reading it for 3 hours, and I have been reading it wrong for a season, and so has every eye on this mountain, because we read it as a weapon, and it is not a weapon. The fingers moved along a branching line, and Lena saw it, the moment the old elf's meaning arrived, saw it the way you see a tumor's shape resolve out of grey static, and went cold to her boots. The lines were not spreading at random. They had never been spreading at random. Every black branch, from the first needle prick above the heart, through every night of that long siege, curved, gently, patiently, unmistakably, now that the bloom had given the pattern scale, toward the tear. It is not killing him, the remembrancer said. Killing him is incidental. It is a root system, children, and it has spent a season growing toward water. The needle was never aimed at the king. Her blind face rose to the room. It was aimed through him, at the moment of the singing, when the mountain mourns, when the air lifts the chain from the dying breast, as airs have lifted it for 10,000 years. The frost completes, the root touches the crystal, and the tear of the first tree leaves this room marked, carried east by loving hands, gladly, willingly, with all its reasons intact, a tainted relic, riding to the holy river inside its own rescue. The old voice dropped to ash. That is the keyhole, and that is the key he believes is coming to him, not the healer alone. The healer, and everything she gathers, signed all of it, in his ink. The silence that followed had teeth. The transfer, Doromir said hoarsely. The succession is the attack. 10,000 years of law, and he built his needle to ride our own ritual. Then we don't perform the ritual. Lena said it the way she said the load-bearing things, flatly, before the anesthetic wore off. The room turned. She was still at the bedside, hands still at their post, and the plan had arrived whole, ugly, the way diagnoses arrive. The frost completes at the singing, at death, when the chain is lifted from a dying king. That's the window it was grown for, so we take the window away. She looked down at her patient, and her patient, 400 years of statecraft in a failing body, was already there ahead of her, already smiling the thin, terrible winter smile, because of course he was. The tear does not move while I breathe. Erling quoted softly into the frozen room. My own law, 10,000 years of law. The paper whisper found, from somewhere, one last edge of iron. Summon the 8, remembrancer. Wake the singers. My son is crowned at dawn, and I intend to attend. What happened in the king's chamber at first light had no name in the protocol of the 9 houses, so the mountain, for the second time in a season, invented one. The lawmasters would call it, ever after, the living song. Word of it ran down the terraces ahead of the singers, the way truth runs through a city that shares one root. The king is crowning his son alive. The king is cheating the enemy of his own death. And Canthalar, which had drummed for the healer and wept inside her memories, rose in the cold dawn to answer its old man's last stagecraft the only way a mountain can. They came out onto the terraces in their tens of thousands, not summoned, not lawful, entirely unprecedented. And when the 100 official singers on the great stair opened the succession, the city below simply joined it, terrace by terrace, voice by voice, until the living song was not being performed for Canthalar, but by it. 10,000 years of protocol, drowned in a sound like the world's heart, deciding, all at once, what it loved. Phelan wept at the chamber door, and did not pretend otherwise. On a fountain rim, 3 terraces down, a small boy stood on his mother's shoulders, with his fist on his chest, keeping the count. The 8 came in haste and disbelief and were briefed in the antechamber by a blind old elf in 9 sentences that rearranged their millennium. The singers came, 100 of them, ranked down the great stair because the succession of Canthalar could not lawfully be sung by fewer. And at the hour when the first gold touched the peaks, the mountain of Canthalar sang the passing of the tear, not as a dirge over a dying king, as it had sung 10,000 years of successions, but for the first time in the memory of the stone as something else entirely, with the old king alive and upright against his pillows to hear every note of it, his own paper voice moving in the harmonies where a corpse should have lain silent. Lena stood at her post at the bedside through all of it, hands on her patient, holding the frost at the collarbone by main strength of 2 worlds medicine, while the singing shook the floor, because the enemy's root, cheated or not, was still drinking the hours, and her job description had not changed. By time. She watched Erling lift the chain from his own neck with his own hands. No heir's hands on a dying breast, no window, the 10,000-year ritual turned inside out, and she watched the black lines at the collarbone writhe as the crystal left him, roots reaching for water that was walking away, and she pressed her palms flat over them and held on. Doramir. The king's voice, inside the vast singing, was almost gentle. Son of Erling, heir of the Kant Peaks, kneel. And Doramir knelt, and his father, alive, breathing, present, in defiance of law and enemy and death's own calendar, set the tear of the first tree around his son's neck, and the mountain song crested over them like the 2 moons rising at once, and somewhere far to the east, Lena knew with cold certainty, a needle 30 years in the placing had just found its lock standing empty. The frost went still under her hands, not defeated. She felt it clearly, clinically, and filed the feeling with dread. Still, the stillness of something recalculating. Erling sagged back against the pillows, spent past spending, and looked up at his son, crowned, tear-bearing, tear-blind, and said, in the paper whisper, with the whole council and 100 singers and 2 worlds listening, now clear the room. All of you but my children, the king of the Kant Peaks, the ghost of the winter smile, former king, has private business and very little office remaining in which to conduct it. Lena tried to leave with the rest. Erling's hand caught her wrist. The 3rd time in one lifetime a dying grip had claimed it, and this one, at last, was gentle. Stay, daughter. You bought this hour. You will witness how it is spent. So she stayed, at her post, hands on the enemy's stilled roots, while an old king spent his hour, and the morning light moved slowly across the chamber floor, and the mountain held its note below them, like a hand held under a falling thing. She would keep what was said in that room all her life and retell almost none of it. Some things are taken on as cargo, not currency. But the shape of it, the mountain later learned, because Doramir himself put it in the record of the stone, kneeling at the sphere with his father 3 days in the earth, so that no child of Canthalar would ever again wait 90 years to hear its like. He told his son about the day he was born, small, early, furious, in the worst winter in a century, and how a king who had buried a wife that same year had stood over the cradle doing what kings do, assessing, and had thought, this one is not like Lyriel, not like Rowan. This one is quiet, and had filed the quietness, wrongly, catastrophically, under lesser, and had spent 90 years discovering, too slowly, in glimpses across council tables and terraces, that the quietness was not absence. It was depth of draw, the archer's virtue, the deep patient pull that looks like stillness until the release. He told him about the 12 hunts through the eastern passes, that he had known of everyone, had let everyone ride, and had stood at the window of the royal spire each time until the horns sang his last child home. He told him what he had told Lena he could not. Never second, only later. And then, because he was Erling, he improved on it, paper voice steady inside the wreck of his body. Lyriel was the mountain's morning, and Rowan was its noon, and I mistook you for the dark, because you came to me at dusk of my life, and I was old and grieving, and reading the light wrong. You were never the dark, Doramir. You were the evening star, the one that holds, the one by which lost things steer. A breath paid for in full. The healer steers by you already. I have watched her do it for a season. Steer back, son. It is the only counsel of my whole reign worth the stone it will be kept in. The crown is a duty, but the steering is the life. And to Lena, at the very end, when the frost under her hands began at last to move again, and no vial in two worlds would answer, and Doramir held one of his father's hands, and she held the other, because that was the geometry the old man had arranged with his last stagecraft. To Lena, Erling of the Kant Peaks turned his winter eyes, and the last thing he ever built with them was a smile. "Well, healer, it appears you have found the limit of your art. I told you the terms, old man." Her voice held, her eyes did not. "I buy time, I never claim to own it." "You bought a season," the paper whisper said. "You bought a crowning, and a spent hour, and an empty lock in the enemy's design. Daughter of the other shore, in 400 years of ledgers, I never once saw time better purchased." The winter eyes moved to his son, then back, and the smile deepened by one last degree. "Take care of each other's watch, and when you reach the river, tell it an old fool paid the toll gladly." The mountain of Cantalar sang his ending as the sun cleared the peaks. Every horn, every terrace, every vein of gold in the living stone, 10,000 years of protocol, and not one note of it rehearsed for a king who had died crowned by his own hand, on his own hour, holding the hands of both his children, the one he had made and the one who had been sent. For a while, she never knew how long. The hour that does not negotiate keeps its own books. Neither of them moved from the geometry the old man had arranged. Doramir on one side, the tear at his breast taking up, slowly, the deep, patient pulse it had kept for 10,000 years against other hearts. Lena on the other, hands folded now over hands that had ruled 4 centuries and, at the very end of them, learned to ask for help. She had stood at this exact post more times than any person should. The foot of the hour, the far side of the last count, and she knew all its protocols, the doctor's protocols, the stepping back, the time of death, the returning of the room to the living. She performed none of them. Some patients you attend. This one she kept, the way you keep a watch, until Doramir reached across the stilled chest between them and took her hand, and the two of them held their dead like a completed circuit, and the mountain's grief carried the part neither of them could yet lift. "He knew," Doramir said at last, wrecked and quiet. "All of it. The frost, the lock, the hour. He saw the whole board at the end, and he played himself as the last piece. My whole life I thought I was watching a king be cautious, a breath that broke and reset. I was watching him draw, Lena. 90 years of depth. This morning was the release, and it was there, in the exact crest of the mountain's grief, with the room empty of everything but song and loss, and 2 people learning the weight of what they now carried, that the frost writing on the dead king's breast moved for the last time. The black lines did not reach for the tear. The tear was gone, and they knew it. They flowed instead, quick as spilled ink, inward, root system collapsing to a single point above the stilled heart, the needle prick where it had all begun, and the point opened. Not wide, not a portal, not even a wound, a keyhole, precisely, a black absence the size of an eye, hanging in the air above a dead king's chest. And through it, arriving like ash falling on snow into the grief-filled singing of the mountain, came the voice, mild, gracious, and for the first time in 30 years, audibly, dangerously surprised. A living song. He broke his own law. A pause, and something that had never once been in that voice before. Recalculation. "I confess it, healer. I did not see the old man's last move. How rare. How refreshing. It has been 30 years since this board produced a piece I did not place." Doramir was up, blade out, between the keyhole and Lena in under a second. The voice ignored him entirely. "Keep the tear then. Carry it clean. It changes the schedule, little healer. It changes nothing else. 5 roads still run east, and I hold the far end of every one, and you will walk them, because the wound between the worlds gives you the same choice it gave me the day it opened, forward or slowly. But before I close his eye," and the black keyhole seemed to lean, impossibly, toward her, past the blade, past the singing, intimate as a Gurneyside whisper at 2:58 in the morning, a parting gift for the only opponent at this table. You ask the stone the right question and let the mountain's weeping drown the answer. Ask it again, 11 years before the witch chose you, whose sentry stood at your father's door. The keyhole began to shrink, gracious to the last, and the voice of Morvath of the Tarima delivered its final word into the crest of a dead king's song. Not mine. The black eye closed. The frost writing on the dead king's breast went to grey ash, then to nothing, dismissed like scaffolding after the work. and the chamber held only the singing and the sunlight, and two people standing over everything they had just gained and lost in a single dawn. Boromir lowered the blade by slow degrees. When he turned, Lena was still at her post, hands resting on a stilled chest that no count would move again, eyes fixed on the empty air where the keyhole had hung. And she had gone somewhere he had learned to recognize, the flat, far diagnostic distance she went to when a chart stopped making sense and she refused to look away until it did. Lena. 11 years. Her voice came from the far place. Boromir, the stone found the hole at my father's door, and the whole amphitheater grieved past it. I grieved past it. And the remembrancer told me that night there was nothing in that corridor worth an enemy's sentry, and we filed it and we moved on because the war kept coming. And he just spent his last word on it, his parting gift. She looked up at last, and in her green eyes, Boromir saw the thing that frightened her more than armies of holes, a differential she could not close. He collects grief. He doesn't give gifts, which means that sentence is a weapon, and it's aimed at the only alliance he's never been able to touch. The one between me and the person who chose me. Not mine. 2 words, and if I believe them, every question I have left stops pointing east. Her hand closed slowly over her stethoscope, the old anchor. It points at SARETH. Outside, the mountain sang an old king into the stone, and the sun climbed, and far below, in the drowned gold of the terraces, 10,000 voices held the note. And in the highest chamber of Canthalar, the second chosen of the glass-eyed prophet stood beside the new bearer of the tear, at the very hour their road finally opened before them, holding the enemy's parting gift in both hands, and unable, trained, cursed, constitutionally unable, to put a question down once it had been asked. 11 years before the witch chose you, whose sentry stood at your father's door? Section 10. They buried Erling of the Kant Peaks in the mountain that had sung him, in the vault of kings where 10,000 years of winter lay sleeping, and Canthalar mourned him for 9 days in the old way. No fires lit, no forges struck, the braided waterfalls unbound from their crystal channels so that the whole city wore its grief the way it had worn its jewelry, loose and falling. On the 3rd day, Boromir did the thing that the lawmasters would set beside the living song in the record of the strange new reign. He carried the remembrancer's sphere into the vault of kings, knelt at his father's stone, and gave the mountain the spent hour, the whole of it, the cradle and the winter, the 12 hunts and the window, where a king had stood listening for horns, the evening star and the steering, so that no child of Canthalar would ever again wait 90 years to hear its like. And then, because grief shared is grief halved, and this reign had apparently decided to legislate accordingly, he had the stone drink one thing more, the empty grey-draped chair, carried down from the throne hall at last after 30 years of vigil, and set beside Erling's stone in the vault. Not burned, not buried. Retired, with its grey cloth folded one final time by the king's own hands, and a single sentence entered into the record above it that made even Valis leave the vault by the far stair. Let it wait here, where the waiting is honest. My father kept a chair for hope. So will I. Lena spent the 9 days the way she had spent every hard loss of her life, working. It was, she had explained once to a bewildered elven healer, the human way, or at least her way. Grief metabolized through usefulness. The hands kept moving so the heart could limp along behind them at its own pace. She worked the healing halls. She drilled the wardens in field medicine. She sat with Nereveth in the shorehouse twice, as promised, and spoke of hospitals, of night nurses, of the proper staffing of the dark hours, and watched something in the old traitor's face slowly unclench, visit by visit, like a fist learning it is allowed to be a hand. And on the 9th evening, when the fires were relit, and the falls rebound, and the forges of Canthalar struck their first note of the new reign, the king summoned his council of war. It was a strange council for a strange reign. Boromir had refused the crystal throne, my father's chair, until I have earned the difference, and stood instead at the great map table, the tear pulsing slow against his breastbone, and around him gathered the shape of everything the season had built. Valis, first of the riders. Ithren, down from the passes for good now, her satchels already packed, the remembrancer, blind face luminous. Lady Nereveth, seated, by the king's deliberate arrangement and the court's continuing astonishment, at his right hand, where the enemy's window could observe its instrument, honored and suspect nothing. Kael of the High Passes, named steward of the mountain that same morning to hold Kanthalar while its king walked the offered road, and the healer of two worlds at the map's eastern edge where she had stood for an hour reading the land the way she read bodies. He holds the far end of every road, Lena said at last. That's what he told us through a dead man's chest, and I believe him. 30 years of design. He knows the order Erling would have taught me because it's the sane order. Dwarves first, nearest, richest roads, the obvious opening move, then the orcs, then the long east to the giants, then his own crystal last when we're strongest. He's had 3 decades to garrison that sequence. Her finger came down on the map's far right, past the Kant Peaks, past Frost Hollow's white waste, past the canyons on the vast quiet ovals behind the world. So we play it backwards. We go for the Tarian first, the farthest, the strangest, the ones no sane strategist opens with, the people who deleted the word enemy from their hands 1,000 years ago. If his design has a thin end, it's there, at the bottom of his priorities, at the far side of everything. The far side of everything, Valus observed to the ceiling, lies across the entire map. Frost Hollow, the caravan roads, the Hollow Deep or the high passes around it, every league of which we will walk in winter, quietly, while the enemy's window is told we are home rehearsing a parade. Yes, Lena said. Through dwarf lands we will not announce ourselves to, past orc canyons that have hated elves for 30 years in the dark season, with the holiest object of your people around the neck of your unannounced king. Yes. A silence. Then the flat soldier's voice delivered its finding. I have waited my whole career for a plan the enemy would refuse to believe out of sheer professional insult. Healer, I am with you. The company was set that night, and it was small, because the true road was a whisper after all, but their whisper, on the wrong road, in the wrong order, walking the maze backwards, the king and the healer, bound by the offered road, Vilis, Ithreni, Phelan, who had petitioned on one knee, citing a debt of 2 lungs, 4 wardens of the western woods, the quiet kind, 10 souls, 2 stags for baggage, and no banners at all. The remembrancer came to Lena when the council broke and pressed something into her palm, a sliver of clouded grey crystal on a silver cord, warm as a held hand. A seed of my stone, the old elf said. It will drink your road, presents, not pretty pictures, so that whatever happens in the east, child, the truth of it comes home to the mountain someday, told by no survivor's hand. And one thing more. The blind face tilted close. You will try to reach the prophet before you go. Do not deny it. You have been circling the sacred pool for 9 days, like a question circling an answer. When you go, and you will, remember what I taught you the first hour. The stone goes where the weight is, so does she. If SARETH does not answer what you ask, healer, mark carefully what she answers instead. Between creatures cannot lie outright. They can only choose which truth to spend. She went to the sacred pool on the last night, alone, past the sleeping gardens, to the high terrace where a bowl of black stone held water so still it had spent 10,000 years mistaken for a mirror. I know you can hear me, Lena said to the still water. You spent a year of your strength on 10 minutes of mirror, so I'll be efficient. I learned bedside economy from a king. Morvath's parting gift, the sentry at my father's door, 11 years before you chose me. He says it wasn't his. She knelt at the rim, green eyes on the black water, and put the question down between them, like an instrument on a tray. Was it yours? For a long time, nothing. Wind over water. The 2 moons doubled in black. Then the pool's stillness deepened. Stillness like Mathor's throat, like something wearing calm. And the glass-eyed reflection that rose in it was not hers. No, said SARETH, and the remembrancer's lesson rang in Lena like a struck bowl. Watch what she spends. Not his, not mine. And before your training builds the next question, no, healer, I do not know whose. I have lived between the worlds for 300 years, and I will tell you what living in a crack teaches. The space between 2 rooms hears a little of both, and belongs to neither, and is very, very rarely empty. The glass eyes did something that in a whole face might have been weariness. Something else watches the wound, child, older than my watching. It does not feed, as his kind feeds. It does not choose, as I choose. It attends. 11 years ago, it attended a corridor where a girl decided what she would become, and I have wondered every day since I found you whether I chose you or whether I was the second to arrive. The cold went through Lena in a slow wave. Then the answer to whose sentry is the reason he spent his last word on it. He does not know either, healer, and it terrifies him, and terror in the deathless turns to strategy within the hour. He has handed you a question that points at me, hoping you will spend the east distrusting your own choosing. The reflection leaned nearer to the water's skin. So decide now, at the pool, before the road. I will tell you the one whole truth I own about it. I do not know what watched you. I know only this. The night I crossed to find the second chosen, I searched your world by weight, as the stone searches, feeling for the soul the wound required. And healer, you were already lit, like a lamp left burning in a window by someone who expected to come back. The water began, very slowly, to still. I did not light you. Ask the river when you reach it. The river is older than the space between. Ask the river who leaves lamps. SARETH. Lena leaned forward, and her own reflection was already reassembling on the black water. The woman in my hospital, the clock at 2:59. Is my world still holding its breath? The last of the glass-eyed light lingered at the pool's rim, and the voice that answered was gentler than it had ever been, and she would only understand this later, on the far side of winter. It did not say yes. Walk east, healer. Some doors must be reached before they can be understood. The farewells took the whole last morning because Canthalar had decided, without consulting protocol, that its healer did not leave by a side gate. Ithren's healers lined the halls with their fists over their hearts. Phelan's guard company, his former guard company, he outranked them all now by the strange arithmetic of quests, turned out in full leaf steel to cough at him theatrically, one last time, in unison, and Lena watched the boy soldier laugh and weep at once, and thought, there, that's the export I'm proudest of. That was not a thing this mountain did before. Neriveth met her at the shorehouse arch, and pressed her hand, and said only, moonsets will be kept, windows will be fed. And when you find the spear that holds my daughter's scream, healer, the sea-glass eyes were dry and terrible and steady. You will not do anything foolish and merciful. You will break it, and let an old traitor spend her last years learning what silence sounds like. And at the great ivory gates, under the carved river and its 5 drowned stars, the children of the lower terraces stood in a solemn double rank with Terenil at their head, and Lena's apprentice stepped forward with a small carved box and his chin at a fatally dignified angle. Inside the box, on a bed of moss, a bead of mountain crystal, drilled and threaded onto a leather cord, carved, she saw as she lifted it and stopped being able to see anything for a moment, into a tiny, perfect drum. So you keep the count, Terenil said fiercely. Wherever, even where we can't hear it. She knelt and let him tie it beside the stethoscope himself, his small fingers absolutely steady, and then the whole double rank of children pounded their fists over their hearts, twice, and 10,000 watching elves took it up terrace by terrace, drums, drums, and that was the sound Canthalar chose to send east with its king and its healer. Not horns, not the mountain's vast singing, just the count, the oldest instrument, the one that means alive, alive, still alive. They rode out through the ivory gates at noon, and the mountain watched them down the long eastern switchbacks until the towers were a memory of light behind the shoulder of the world. The road changed within hours, the way roads do when they stop being loved. The silver-threaded stone of the High Kingdom giving way to older, rougher work, then to no work at all. A track, a habit of the land, winding down out of the elf-warded heights toward the white country that Lena had so far met only as a word on maps and a chill in old men's voices. She saw Frost Hollow for the first time at the day's last light, from the final ridge of the Kant foothills, and understood immediately why every voice had chilled. It was beautiful the way the 8 lords were beautiful, the way this whole world kept insisting on being, vast, pale, perfect, and utterly without concession. A sea of white ran to the horizon under the rising moons, snowfields and frozen fen, and the black glass ribbons of the caravan roads, and far out on it, pinpricks of orange that Valis named as the chimney lights of the northern dwarf holds, burning under the ice like coals banked in ash. Somewhere beyond all of it, invisible, lay the canyons and the ovals and the smoking edge of everything. The wind came off the white with a long low note like the world clearing its throat. The frozen roads, Ithreni said beside her, in the tone of a healer reading a chart she does not love. Pray the winter is ordinary. And if it isn't? Then we will learn. said Valis flatly from her other side. Why, the dwarves say that in Frost Hollow there are two kinds of travelers. He turned his stag down the last slope toward the dark, the quick and the found. The first camp of the eastern road was made in the lee of a standing stone older than the elves' own memory, and it was there, around a fire kept low and blue over Ithreni's astonishing capacity to produce soup from winter, that Lena discovered what 10 souls and no banners actually felt like, and filed the feeling permanently under a word she had spent 2 worlds mistrusting: safe. Not safe as in guarded, though Valis's watches were set with a craftsman's paranoia, safe as in known. Phelan drilled the 4 quiet wardens in the recovery position by firelight, gravely, botching the count until she corrected it and the whole circle laughed. Valis cleaned his knives and told, in his flat economical voice, a story about a young Erling and a dwarf lord and a wager involving a frozen river that could not possibly have been true and had every soul at the fire wiping their eyes. Ithren pressed a warm cup into her hands without being asked, at the exact moment the cold found her collar, a colleague's timing, a countrywoman's, and the king of the Kant Peaks sat in the snow like any soldier of the company, mending a strap with his own hands, the tears' slow pulse keeping time with the fire, and caught her watching him across the flames, and did not look away, and neither did she. Anyone who has ever been carried by a small company through a large dark knows the arithmetic Lena worked out that night, and never afterward unlearned. Home is not a place that holds still. It is a fire that agrees to travel. Doromir found her at dusk on the first ridge east of the city, when the company had made its cold camp and the lights of Canthalar lay behind them like a spilled constellation, and the true dark of the road ahead had begun to make itself known. "You've been carrying 2 farewells all day," he said, settling beside her on the frost-silvered rock. "You gave the mountain its one. I have been waiting, with truly royal patience, for the other. Have you?" The 2 moons were rising over the eastern white, silver and rose gold, the same 2 moons that had opened this whole impossible chart above a stranger in the grass. "I keep an orderly file system, you know, everything in its place. 12 years, 2 worlds, 1 drawer per grief, all closed and labeled." She turned and looked at him, the winter-carved profile, the deep green eyes, the tears' slow pulse at his throat where his father's heartbeat used to keep it, the whole patient depth of drawer of him. And Lena Marlowe, who had survived the stone opening every drawer she owned in front of 10,000 witnesses, discovered there was exactly 1 file left in her that had never once been read aloud. And then a prince walked out of a silver forest and offered me his hand, like an oath, and I've been misfiling things ever since, pending, while a king died. Pending, while the world was ending, because that's the oldest rule in my profession, you understand. You don't open the personal drawer on shift. And I have been on shift, Doromir, without 1 night's break since I was 23 years old. The first stars were arriving over Frost Hollow. Somewhere below, Valis's low voice set the watches. Phelan laughed at something. Ithrene's pans rang. 10 souls, 2 worlds, 1 road, walking the maze backwards into winter. "And now?" Doromir asked quietly. "Now the shift changes." She reached up, deliberately, clinically, with the steady hands that had held kings and counted hearts and never once trembled at anything the hour could do, and laid her palm along the winter of his face and felt it turn to dawn under her hand. "New protocol, effective immediately. The healer is off duty for the next 5 minutes. If the world ends in the interval, it will simply have to wait its turn. It's called triage. I'll teach you." 5 minutes, the king of the Kant Peaks murmured, gathering her in with the gentleness of a man handling the one thing on 2 worlds that had ever been offered to him freely. "My people live 900 years, you know. We are considered a patient." Doromir, "Filed," he said, "under now," and kissed her, at last, on the first ridge of the eastern road, under 2 moons and the arriving stars, while below them the camp pretended with heroic unanimity to notice nothing, and the count at both their throats kept its old rhythm, 3 and then 1, and then, for the first time in either of their guarded lives, simply, now, now, now. Far to the east, in the fortress of fused obsidian, at the heart of the ash, Morvath of the Torima stood before the wound between the worlds and listened to his moonset reports, and was content. The mountain rehearsed its parade. The window confirmed it. The tear had escaped his ink, an admitted inelegance, but the board still ran east, all of it, every road, and the healer would walk them in the spring, like all the pieces before her, in the sane order, into the garrison sequence, gathering his key for him, relic by relic. The deathless could afford patience. Patience was the whole of his art. He did not know, the window had not told him, would never tell him, that 10 souls were already 3 ridges into the winter dark, walking his maze backwards. But as the red crystal dimmed at the end of the night's business, something at the wound's ragged edge shifted, a flicker, a wrongness, an attending, and the high sorcerer of the Terima went still in a way his folded shape had not gone still in 300 years, and turned his hood slowly toward the tear in the world, and asked the darkness, in a voice from which all the graciousness had suddenly gone, "Who is there?" The wound did not answer. It only hung in the dark, drinking, its edges trembling faintly, like a door listening on both sides. And on the other side of everything, in a city that did not believe in elves, in a hospital that smelled of antiseptic and cold coffee, in an emergency ward gone quiet in the way that seasoned doctors never trust, the clock above the abandoned nurses' station of St. Aldrich's, which had held its breath at 2:59 for a season of another world's time, clicked forward. 3 o'clock. Down the fluorescent corridor, doors began to bang open. Voices, running feet, a crash team spilling toward Bay 6, where a curly-haired patient had vanished from a locked ward, where the monitors were screaming into empty air, where a stethoscope's absence hung on a hook like a question, and where, on the abandoned gurney, printed into the pillow in fine grey ash that no one in that building would ever be able to explain, lay the mark that would end the first book of Lena Marlowe's second life and begin everything else, 5 stars in a curving line like a river, and a 6th, jagged, inverted, burning slowly through the cotton, still warm,